Senate other than Rusty? Anybody else? Okay, so we finally have a real live act, a real live bill that could get passed in the Senate and in the U.S. House of Representatives. And I was in D.C. right around mid-June and had the opportunity to talk with our senators' offices and our congressmen here in West Tennessee about this legislation. Now, the next couple of slides are from Nathan. Did you get it going?
Yeah, it's going.
Awesome, thank you. Hi, everybody. All right, here we go. It's in the House, it's HR 2788. In the Senate, it's Senate Bill 1037. So what are we trying to fix? So we know that the rule from 1977 is as old as me. Did y'all know that? I'm 1977. I'm going to be 42 next month. I know it's old, right? All right, but anyways, that's when it was written. But they have done very little to update it. The emergency preparedness stuff it was added. Thank you to Obamacare, and the emergency preparedness rule is longer than this entire rural health rule together as a whole. So we're going to talk a little bit about hopefully some of the relief.
People who want to watch the live stream know where it is.
No, we have to email it out.
He said it's on the Atlantis YouTube page.
Okay, so you want to ask Heather to shoot an email to the Mays family to look on the YouTube page. Okay, good. All right, so what are we trying to fix? And these are his slides, but just so you know, we need you to contact your congressmen and your senators and let them know why this is important to you. Now, the reason it's been written so that it's designed to pass. These are the parts of the rule that do not have any money attached to them. So typically, when you talk about laws, they want to say, well, how much is it going to cost, right? And if it costs money, they're immediately going to say, we can't do that, right? Because that's what government, depending on which side of the aisle you're on, either wants to spend money or doesn't want to spend money accordingly. So here we go. So there's sections of the rule that are really important to us. Is first of all, modernizing the physician assistant and nurse practitioner utilization requirements. Right now, the way that it's written in the rule does not match all of the states. So there's some states where a nurse practitioner can practice on their own. And so we're trying to get this to match the state, whatever the state law is. And so right now we want to allow them to practice to the top of their license as the state requires. And so that if they can reword that part of the rule, because we wouldn't want them to say, well, you need, the feds say you need supervision by an MD, but your state doesn't say you do. We want that to match state by state. Another section is there's some outdated lab requirements. So some people bought a special piece of equipment in their office to be able to run a hemoglobin because they were sending out all their H&Hs. Well, it still says you have to be able to run a hemoglobin or a hematocrit on site. Well, what you did in 1977 is very different from how you practice medicine today, and so we're trying to get that rewritten. It just says prompt access. Now, most of our rural health clinics aren't too far from a hospital or can get a lab done stat if they need to. It doesn't have to necessarily buy a piece of equipment to have on site if you don't have a CBC machine in the clinic, as an example. The Section 4 is allowing RHCs the flexibility to contract with PAs and nurse practitioners. The way that it's written right now is it says you have to have one on staff. So if you are a doctor or you are someone like Rusty, an individual who owns a rural health clinic, he would technically have to hire them and have them on staff. He couldn't just contract with them to work in the clinic. And so they're trying to update that part of the outdated law. And then finally, Section 6, they want to be able to give states the authority to designate areas as rural for the purposes of the RHC program. Right now, it's all done by HRSA, which is a federal program, and a lot of the states have a section in their government. We have in Tennessee that says these areas are designated. If your area is designated, then you would be allowed to put a rural health clinic in that area. What they're saying is it's the feds deciding, and this would allow the states to have some say-so to determine if you could put a rural health clinic there. So that would be important. So those things are things that could easily just change the law, pass it, wouldn't be a problem. The part that would cost a little bit of money, so that's one reason why it's important, those that we just said. These are the ones that have cost provisions, sections 5 and 7. Section 5, they want to allow rural health clinics to be the distance site for telehealth. So right now, as a rural health clinic, you can only be the originating site for a telehealth visit, which means you could have, an orthopedic surgeon or a dermatologist in Nashville see your patient in your clinic by telehealth, but you don't get to count the visit if you're a rural health clinic. So the distance site would be the orthopedic, the specialist as an example, okay? But let's say someone like Rusty, or if you have multiple clinics, let's say you've got, a cardiologist that comes on site or a psychiatrist, and they could do those visits via telehealth. But if you are, as a rural health clinic, cannot bill that as a RHC encounter and be paid your rate. So why would any rural health clinic get paid $25 to do all the equipment and, hold up a room and use a nurse just to be the originating site? We need to be able to be the distance facility. And so that's a really important part of this legislation. We also have some that are setting up, allowing the nurse practitioner or one of the providers from the rural health clinic to go into the school to do visits and be able to count that as a rate and get your rate. And so that's really important also for those of you who might have a school nearby who is in desperate need of, simple primary care visits. All right, the biggie for those of you who see Medicare, if you're not pediatrics, is they're raising the cap for your Medicare. And so right now you're capped, is it 8470, Lauren? For 2019, 8470, you get 80% of that, and then the patient is responsible for 20% of the charges, as you all know. We need it to be raised to increase equitability between independent and provider-based and FQHCs. So FQHCs and provider-based RHCs have an uncapped Medicare rate. So they get their full RHC rate for every Medicare patient they see. Now, we aren't saying, hey, pay us our rate the same as both. We're just saying raise it to give us, we just need the extra money because we're almost upside down on our Medicare payments. And so this legislation, if passed, would increase the upper limit to $105 next year, $110 the following year, $115 in 2022, and then it would just raise by the MEI again to help catch up independent rural health clinics on their Medicare reimbursements. And so this is really important legislation. So if you have, anybody have any questions about what this says? It's pretty simple, yes.
Is there anything specific that says something about physically going into a school? Because we have a school that wants a therapist, but they can't find one.
It's all about location, and so that's where states could then say, a public school could be an eligible location for an RHC visit, and if they were to say that, then in theory you could bill those as an eligible location as an RHC provider. Does that make sense? Where the state would have the decision to do that. So that's the issue with the location. Right now, we know RHC is very specific about the location of the visit. And so that's why Rusty was saying a hospital visit is by definition not a RHC visit. So we can't count those visits because they're not the proper location. Whereas if they said the school was an allowable location, gosh, how amazing would it be if we could, partner with our local schools. Okay, so this is what we need to do. We are asking them to co-sponsor the RHC Modernization Act. Don't kill yourself. We are going to send you these slides so you'll have the links. But this essentially says what we're trying to get them to understand. I'm not going to read it, but just this is sort of the blurb of what you would want to say to your congressmen and senators. So we want you to reach out to Marsha Blackburn's office, Lamar Alexander. They all have, to Rusty's point, a healthcare person who specializes in that in their office. And so do your congressman will have people who work on Medicare as an example. So we need them to co-sponsor so that we can get this passed this legislative session. And this is the closest we've ever gotten to having this happen since I've been doing this. So this is really good news for us that we've gotten this far, that it has been introduced in the Senate and in the House, and they have a rule that they think they can get passed. It'll just be the question of will they approve the cost side of the equation, which just the telehealth stuff in and of itself would be tremendous. Okay, so y'all, we've talked to you about hearing that the Trump administration wanted to relieve some of the regulatory burden that has been put on you. Am I blocking you? Can you see? Okay. And so basically, we thought these were released last September. We thought they would be approved sometime this month. So as soon as we know for a fact that the rule is applied, we will let you know. But some of that relief includes changing the annual review of your policies and program evaluations to do that every other year instead of every year, allowing facilities to do their emergency preparedness every other year, which would be great if we could do emergency preparedness this year, do program evaluation and policy and procedure review next year. You know, we could alternate it, would just allow us not to be so burdened all the time, because it's extremely time-consuming process. Which y'all have us. Some rural clinics don't have anybody, and they're trying to do us all on their own. So certainly it's time-consuming. So we would want to do that every other year. We want to eliminate the requirement that RHCs must document their communication with emergency preparedness officials. We have some counties in Tennessee that do a great job with their EMA. We have some counties that you call them, you email them, crickets. I mean, nothing. Much less trying to, get involved with a community event. Forget about it. So it would be great for us to not have to document that. But that is one thing we have to do right now is I called, here's who I talked to, here's when I left a message, here's the emails. So we have the burden is on us to show that we have reached out for your emergency preparedness. And then to reduce the number of emergency preparedness exercises per year to one. Right now you have to do both tabletop and a community event, and in the absence of a community event, you can do a facility-based event. We're trying to say one is enough. Just let us instead of two. So these we hope will be approved this month. If so, we will let you know, but this has already been introduced by CMS, and we hopefully we'll have some information in the next couple of weeks if it's final. And then the link is there where you can read it for yourself. So who remembers having to put 15 languages worth of discrimination stuff on all of your paperwork and in your binder and on everything you mailed out? And it was extremely inconvenient, and in rural areas of Tennessee, having to put stuff up in Arabic in your waiting room, people were really excited about that. But basically, we want to make sure that everybody understood who came for care that they knew they weren't going to be discriminated against. That's really important, and in the top 15 languages, so that whoever happened to present in your clinic you would be able to communicate with them. We can help you. That is really important. Not to have to print it, and it was a lot of work. So basically, Trump administration says we are going to completely repeal Section 1557, which is the taglines on the use of language access plans. They said you can go to this link down here and read about it, but essentially the 2016 estimate was $7.2 million in one-time costs, and then another $3.6 billion over 5 years would save in money that you wouldn't have to come out of your pocket to print and do all of those things. One of the things was to provide a video of language services. I mean, it was really extreme, the amount of things that they were asking you to do. And so essentially it has been proposed to be removed. So just FYI there. And you can read more about it at that link. There have been updates to the RHC documents that define what you need to do, the Appendix G, and Susan is going to talk about that a lot when she does her portion, and then the Medicare Benefit Policy Manual, Chapter 13 that Rusty was referencing, it was also updated at the end of last year. And so again, we stay on top of all of that to help you understand what you need to know, but these are the links if you can't sleep at night and want to read them. So basically, the compliance basics, y'all should know most or all of this, but stop me if you have a question. We're saying we will comply with state, federal, and local laws. The compliance basis from infection control, the things they look for are you doing proper hand washing? So when they come to do a survey, they will ask to see patients with one of your providers. These nurses who are surveyors, they are not healthcare providers. So they are not looking to say, did they appropriately treat the patient? They are looking to see, are you following your policies? Are you washing your hands? All the things. Are you checking for allergies? All the things that you are supposed to do inside of an encounter. We want to make sure the standard precautions are in use, that you've documented that you've trained your people on that. We don't want there to be cross-contamination, and that's where we've got mark and dirty sinks and clean sinks and those kinds of things. And this is important to wash your hands after you go to the bathroom. Otherwise, shaking hands becomes putting your hands in each other's pants. Oh, dear. All right. Infection control. Now, I do have some chocolate up here, so if anybody wants to chime in, I'll hurl Snickers or Reese's peanut butter cups your direction. So, when you have something to add, you'll get rewarded with sugar. If you're using reusable surgical instruments, we want to make sure that you're you following the standards. You've got to show that the staff has been trained on competencies and autoclaves. They love to see an autoclave because they can't wait to write up a deficiency. So really important, if you have an autoclave in your clinic, that you are following exactly what it says in the manual. That is really important. So we can go through that with you when we come on site, but just know we want to make sure that it's being done correctly, that the pouches are being stored correctly, that that the machine is being checked correctly, and that it is in fact sterile, and you can show that it is. All right, you got to post a bunch of stuff. You've got to make sure that your hours of operation are that are posted clearly. If they change, it's no big deal. Just update it. You also have to let them know where to go in case of an emergency, which you want to make sure is also clearly posted when they walk up. When the RHC is open and the hours that the building is open. If there is strict admin hours, sometimes the clinics are open and there's not a provider there. And if that is a part of your regular schedule, you have to delineate that on your on the exterior of your building. Hey, we're open from 8 to 9, but it's just admin time. You have to display your licenses. You have to make sure people can get out in case of emergency. You have to have your extinguishers mounted, inspected. You have to have evidence of fire safety training and your local fire department to come and inspect your building once per year. Typically, they'll come. We have a lot of counties that just have volunteer fire departments, and so you usually can call them and somebody will come and do a walkthrough, and then they just need to provide you something in writing that says they've come to check. You want to make sure that, the TB status in Hep B, there has been some new TB requirements. You don't have to do the annual TB test like you used to have to unless you have had an incident. So unless you're high risk for TB incidents, you don't have to do that in your entire staff like you used to. You want to make sure there's personal protective equipment available, and you want to make sure you're checking the OIG exclusion list. Anybody have any tips or tricks on OIG exclusion?
Hey, but I have a question.
Okay.
So I do, and it's every 30 days, I think, that you have to go into the OIG.
Did y'all hear?
Is that
Every 30 days, you have to go into the OIG exclusion list, type in every one of your people, and make sure that they haven't been in trouble with the OIG. You want to say something about it, Lauren?
The OIG.
Yeah.
What did you say?
I was trying to get a Snickers bar. I don't want more to get my Snickers bar. But I have a question. So if most of you take AmeriGroup, your AmeriGroup rep just recently came to your office and handed you that pamphlet, that booklet that said you got to train all of your people and it's all about discrimination and all that. But on that page with the OIG, and I meant to bring the page with me and I forgot it, it had another website. You remember what that was, Laura, that I asked you about? It was the the SAM. You're supposed to check it every 30 days. I'm like, what am I looking for? What am I checking for? So I asked my AmeriGroup rep, and she said, never heard of it. I don't know. Let me find out. And that was about 60 days ago, and she hasn't come back yet.
Well, I will tell you, you will probably not be surprised. Anybody had super duper helpful MCO reps. Catch.
Yes.
I'll say, it is recommended that obviously on hire, you're gonna do background checks for people. All right?
Background checks on hire required, and then
You need to check, and you can do this all on the state of Tennessee's website. You need to check the sex offender registry.
sex offender registry. I'm repeating for that.
Their license is current, and, if they've been under any kind of discipline. You also need to check the OIG. That's gonna show you if they've been excluded from providing services in a Medicare facility, which are real helpful to kids. You can check their name. Now, the problem with the OIG website is when you type their name in, it doesn't tell you there's no problems here. If you type their name in and nothing happens, then that's how you know.
So the way you know when you check an OIG on the OIG website, you type their name in, and if nothing happens, that means they're okay. There is nothing that says gold star,
It just says no
green
results.
check. No,
It says
all
no
clear.
results.
Doesn't say that.
The Tennessee Division of Health Boards sends you can get a monthly list sent out that'll show you any licensed person in the state of Tennessee that has gotten in trouble. So if you've got an LPN that got a DUI and didn't tell you.
Right. So you can get on a list for the Tennessee Department of Health. It's on their website. You can check their website, but they'll email you every licensed provider in the state. If something happens, if you have a provider that got in trouble and didn't tell you, it will come on that list.
Go to if you Google health license verification.
Google health license verification. It'll take you there.
It'll take you to that site and you can type anybody's name in.
Do you need a Snicker bar?
No,
Reese's peanut butter cup?
if you you're it, girl. You're it.
What is he talking about?
But it is important to periodically check your employees.
Check your employees. It's important. You never know when something comes up and you didn't know about it. So just do that. Yes.
Shortage on TV materials across the nation.
Which is, I think that's why they redid those requirements, because of that shortage on TB. But if you do a lot of mission trips, or if you're there's a blood test for it now. So, okay, yes, Dr. Armour.
What if you have discovered a problem with one of your employees?
Okay.
And the nursing board has not posted anything regarding your license, but you found something on a background check and they've been in your employ for 3 months.
Now, we are not lawyers, so we can't give you legal advice, but that's exactly what the point is.
Is there anyone else that basically, because I'm rural health, that I should be informing?
Right. So and certainly, let's say, that's your determination to make. What you need to do as far as that goes when you find something like that on a background check or on one of those websites. But yes, you need to be documenting everything that happened, so that in case it comes back on you, you have everything in writing of what happened. And so, any other questions? All right. All right, so the only thing I want to say about location is you wouldn't be in the room if you weren't located in an area that I came to. But we want you to understand that if you do decide to move your clinic, we certainly want you to rent for a while, but then if you want to buy a clinic and move, and then there's a time to do that. But you've got to make sure that your location is still eligible. So as long as you're at the same address, everything is fine. They can't ever take your RHC status away unless you do something that's a condition level offense. And so as long as you're doing everything that you're supposed to do and your address was certified, even if your area loses the status, you will be grandfathered in. There are certainly RHCs in areas right now that are not rural, that they are located in. However, if you decide you want to move, you've got to let us know. We've had some clients do that, and then I had a small panic attack when I realized it because I didn't know about it. And it turned out okay, fortunately. But if you decide to move, it's fine. We just need to make sure that you're eligible. And if you're not eligible, you need to wait until we can make sure that we can get it eligible if need be. Makes
Change of address, you gotta do too.
correct. There's right. Yeah, certainly. There's forms that have to be done. But I'm saying you haven't made a decision to move and bought a property and done everything, and then we have to say, if you do that, you're going to lose your status. We just don't want that to happen. Okay, physical plant and environment. Most of these things you already know. Your clinic is constructed and arranged and maintained to ensure access to and safety of patients and has adequate space for provision of services. There is a preventive maintenance program. That's why we always say if you have anything electronic that touches a patient, you've got to make sure that it is being annually inspected. So that's why we say that, because that's what the law says. Both the mechanical, electrical, and patient care equipment is maintained and in safe operating condition. Drugs and biologicals are appropriately stored. And we always have this question. They say, well, Shannon, what's appropriately stored? So, like, if you come over to my house and I say it's clean, there's some people that my house is not going to be clean enough. And there's some people who are going to be like, oh, your house is really clean, and I think it's a mess, right? Because there's really no definition of what clean is or definition of what appropriate space is. So, again, it's up to, in absence of a definitive answer, it's up to the owner or the medical director to decide what that is deemed. Now, we know there are specifics about drugs and biologicals. You know what is required in terms of how you have to keep drugs safe. If you have anything scheduled in the clinic, it has to be behind a double lock. Again, okay, what's a double lock? Well, okay, so if the door locks and then you have it in a lockbox, does that count as a double lock? We say yes, it does. If you have something scheduled in your emergency kit and you've got it like a zip tie on it, does that count as a lock? Those kinds of things. You just have to make sure that you're following the rules as far as those things go. Clean and orderly premises. So again, you're clean and orderly, am I clean and orderly? If you have a new clinic, it's a lot easier. If you've been there for 40 years, sometimes it's a little bit different. CDC recommendation on multi-dose vials. So I have some clients who don't allow any multi-dose vials in the clinic at all. In that case, you would never have to date a vial, because if you just have a single dose, you use it and you throw it away. We have had people that have been surveyed and they had a single dose vial and they didn't use the whole thing and they put a date on it, and that's an immediate deficiency. So if you do have multi-dose vials, please make sure that they are dated when they are opened. That's really important. And then they say it cannot be stored in any kind of a patient care area. So if you have a closet that has supplies in a patient care area, it has to be secured. Basically, you don't want a kid opening it and drinking it down, right? Okay, don't have expired drugs or supplies. Even the best clinics will have them. We find them every time. You just got to stay on top of it, even if you're a really good clinic, Robbie. You have to make sure that refrigerated medications are being logged, and your vaccines, even if you don't do VFC, you still may have vaccines in your clinic that need to be recorded twice daily. No food in the medication refrigerator. Put a sign on it. No food. No coffee creamer. You want to make sure you have a process for complete and legible labeling of those multi-dose vials. You want to have a sample log in place. Now, we have some people log in every sample that they have. So for us, it's okay if you just want to put the sample, if you want to have the practice to put the sample code in their chart, because the whole reason you do that is to say, if there is a big mass recall of the medicine, how do you know who you gave it to? And so that's what we want to be able to show. If you don't want to have to worry about that, then just don't have samples in your clinic and problem solved. Log and receipt and disposition of all controlled substances. Also, most of the local law enforcement will allow you, they have a way to dispose of unused medications. You can do it through your local law enforcement. And you can also, it's a great thing to share on your Facebook pages, is they have drug take backs. And some of them have boxes now where you can do a drug take back and they can safely dispose of unused opioids. We know that that's a big problem in Tennessee, where that's where most of the people that are doing them are finding them. There's grandmas.
Take any controlled substances back.
Right, you take it to they can take it. You can work in conjunction, share their information about those boxes where they can be safely disposed of. And then your emergency medications are stored appropriately, and make sure that some people have they have those boxes that just, it automatically ships you something if something goes out of date, but not everybody has that. So if you don't have one of those, just make sure you have a list of what's in it, maybe it written on it when it expires, so that you can prompt yourself to reorder something when it's going to be expiring. Any helpful tips or tricks on emergency kits? Nobody wants a Snickers. All right, compliance basics, oxygen safety. If you have oxygen in your clinic and it doesn't have tubing right on it, what's going to happen when you have an emergency and you got to go digging for some tubing? So there's a hook on it. Make sure there's some tubing hooked on there, so that you can use it if you have an emergency. And then if it has an e-cylinder, make sure they're secured. That's important. And then there's a sign, hey, oxygen stored here, so they don't come in with their cigarette and blow everybody up, right? So this is an example of things we see on the internet. This is rust. It's caused by oxygen, and it's called oxidation. We breathe oxygen every day. If it can do this to a chain, just imagine what it can do to your lungs. Please help us share about the danger of oxygen. Everything you see on the internet is not true. Okay, equipment management, again, you want to make sure you have a policy, that it's labeled, clean and dirty areas are labeled, you don't have any equipment on the floor, that you have a process for cleaning and disinfecting your equipment in between use, that you keep a list of everything and your manufacturer's numbers, especially if something disappears, then you have to be able to track it, but that you have the serial numbers, and then you have those logs and checklists ready in case they look. From an organizational structure, basically we just have to say, we have to disclose who the owner of the clinic is, and who the medical director of the clinic is. That the medical director is providing the oversight and the chart review as required by Tennessee state law. We have the organizational chart, standards of conduct in our policy manual, and that we have job descriptions for those employees. We did provide those. If you didn't have a manual when you became an MAS client, we have those. What's important to us is that whatever you deem are the responsibilities of those people is what is captured on that sheet. So if you have a different job description than what's in your manual, we just need to make sure that it's been updated. Because sometimes when we're first doing our policy and procedure manuals, it can be quite overwhelming, all the information that you have to have in there. So just when you go to look at your policy and procedure manual, that's a good place to look. Make sure that what we have written in there is truly what you're doing. And then show that you've done the training of your employees. A couple of little tidbits about RHC. One of the things, you aren't supposed to have any patients beyond the waiting room when there's not a provider in the clinic. I've never seen them show up when there hasn't been a provider in the clinic, but I don't know what your policy is. Just be aware. And then you have a policy for referring patients and a follow-up process. Again, that you've staffed your clinic appropriately to be able to take care of the patients for which you serve. And that's where this part 3 is where it talks about you having to have one on staff. That's one of the things that we're trying to get changed so that you can contract if you need to.
Shannon,
Yes.
question about the referral.
Yes.
So is that talking about just test referrals or all consultant referrals or all of that?
Essentially just that you say, if we can't take care of this, we have people that we refer to. So we refer to these pulmonologists or these home health agencies or these hospitals. These are the people that we are sending patients to.
Well, because you're not covering the tests, and really, to me, it's more important to have a log book for mammograms and CAT scans and MRIs and X-rays, ultrasound,
So you can log every test you send your patients out for. Something that we've seen, especially with PCMH process, is that, you know, you don't even know if they're filling the prescriptions you write them. So how can you know if they're going to get the mammogram or whatever other services you have referred them to do? So
Well, and that's part of, you know, as being medical director, that's part of the audit process too. Have they been getting their mammogram? Have they been getting their colonoscopy?
so if your medical director is not checking behind you to be sure that those things have been, then you want to make sure they're doing that.
When I'm at, like at Wilson Family Walking Clinic, when I'm asked to audit charts.
To audit a chart.
Part of their whole process, then that's on that audit checklist.
Right. So when your medical director is auditing charts, they can go behind and make sure that you have ordered the tests that those patients need to have had completed. And then you can keep a logbook of to show that you have in fact referred them to do so.
And made sure that you have gotten those results back.
And made sure you got the results back in the clinic and it's filed in their file.
Some EHR systems have a tickler system in it where when that's ordered by the provider, it automatically goes into a recall. So you have a staff member or someone that can go in there, work that system. If that lady didn't go for her mammogram after 30 days, you can run
It'll
a
let you know.
report and you can work that. It's
But
full
again,
compliance.
my malpractice insurance company, which has been in Tennessee forever, has told the physicians, don't rely on your tickler systems of your EMRs.
So there is a
All
tickler
through.
system in some people's EMR that will
Tickler says an
show
alarm.
you, it'll an alarm if you don't get it back.
But they still fall through the cracks.
So this is just to help protect us and try to keep patients from falling through the cracks that have not gotten the tests they need to. Thank you. Anything
And
else?
then you need to convey the results to the patient.
Yeah.
Right, and then make sure the patient has a way that you can document that you've given them the results. So this is where it's talking about some of those physician responsibilities. Again, this is the actual law. So I'm clicking, this is all in your manual, which we will give you back. That we will provide services, the lab, healthcare services that we provide. This is just, again, all the services. So one of the things we say, there are 6 labs that you have to provide as a rural health clinic that you have to be able to provide on site. That's your urine, your hemoglobin or hematocrit, glucose, occult blood, pregnancy test, and then you have to be able to culture to send out. So everybody knows that if you've not been certified, you do have to do a hemoglobin or hematocrit on site. For the purpose of being approved as a rural health clinic. You don't actually have to perform them, you just have to have the ability to perform them. And then you want to make sure that all of those in your lab, all of your controls are being done and documented by the instructors for use. And then you want to make sure that your CLIA license is current and posted. Okay, the emergency part is can be a point of contention with a surveyor. So this is the way the law reads. It says you have to be able to provide medical emergency procedures as a first response to common life-threatening injuries and acute illness, and has available the drugs and biologicals commonly used in life-saving procedures, such as analgesics, anesthetics, antibiotics, anticonvulsants, antidotes, medics, serums, and toxoids. Now, anybody induced vomiting in their clinic anytime recently? No? This is an example of why we need that Rural Health Modernization Act. However, some people keep activated charcoal on site, and as far as anticonvulsants, are you going to really give someone an anticonvulsant if they're seizing in the clinic? No, but we do recommend, because it says anticonvulsant on that list, even though it says such as, that would be our agreement. It's our argument to a surveyor is it says such as, which is we've approved with our medical director, we're not going to keep an emetic in the clinic. It's not standard of practice. However, because it says that, we recommend you put something like liquid dilantin, which is not scheduled, in that kit. Yes, Mike?
Does getting an ambulance to the clinic in a few minutes count?
Well, again, that's where your specific clinic and your medical director would decide what you need to keep somebody stable until you can get care. I mean, we've got some rural health clinics where the ambulance is literally in the same parking lot. But then I have others where, Phyllis, how long would it take an ambulance to get to your clinic? At least 20 minutes. So she's got to be prepared differently than if you can get an ambulance, in 2 minutes. Right, exactly. And so that's where our argument is, we want your medical director to decide what's best for your clinic. So some clinics have defibrillators, some don't. Again, that's you and your medical director's decision, if you have that. You'll have an emergency box. The contents will be decided, again, by your medical director. The clinical staff will at least be BLS certified annually. The staff will be trained on the emergency medical process, and she'll talk about that in depth. Again, this just says that we will. One thing that we probably don't talk about enough, do you have a contingency plan if something happens to your medical director? It is required that you have a backup, because we have had situations where someone's medical director was tragically killed in an accident. Well, then what do you do? So you can't close your clinic down. You have to have a backup plan. So if you don't have a backup plan, make sure you have something written down, or that you go ahead and identify one. I saw some eyebrows raised, so maybe not everybody has that done. But again, you don't want to be caught off guard in case of a tragedy. And again, none of us are promised tomorrow, so we want to make sure that we're ready if that happens. Scope of treatment, you just want to make sure that you've got in writing what policies and procedures, treatment plans that you are going to agree to provide in your clinic, what the oversight looks like, the collaborative agreement between the doctor and the nurse practitioner or PA, that you have the guidelines for medical management, including when you're going to refer, to Dr. Armour's point, that you have criteria for diagnosing and treating health conditions. And that can be as simple as, we are going to go with the 4th edition of, blah, blah, whatever book, and that you have that on site. So that would be sufficient. You don't have to have a big book with every single thing printed in a binder. If you just say, we're going to go off of this particular text, that's sufficient. And then how do we follow up with our patients? Again, how do we know if they've gotten that mammogram? And if you have that tickler system, then what's your policy to make sure that those are being followed up on? Health records, again, most of your health records should be complete, because your EMR should force you to be. But remember, these were written before there was even such a thing as an EMR, right? So again, you just want to make sure that they contain all the necessary information. Under Tennessee law, your medical records have to be kept for at least 10 years. If they're under 18, you have to keep them for 10 years past their 18th birthday. So just make sure you keep those records like you're supposed to. We will help you with those program evaluations, but as it stands right now, until this month, if they say otherwise, once per year we'll do a full evaluation of your program. That's why we asked you to bring us your manuals, and we'll go through those together. We'll meet on site as a team and make sure that we're following the law to evaluate your RHC process. You have to have a policy to annual evaluate. So you're going to have a policy that says, it is our policy to do an annual evaluation, and then you actually have to have the annual evaluations. In the report, failure to do that is a condition level deficiency. We just want to avoid those deficiencies if we can. Anybody who's written a plan of correction knows what a pain it is. And again, we're going to document all of that in your manual. Emergency preparedness, Susan is going to go on in depth. So again, you don't want to have to write a plan of correction. Our job is to make sure you're ready when those surveyors show up, and that's what we're here for you for, so that when I come on site, we'll go through that together. It's fun, isn't it, Robbie? I handed Robbie an expired medicine, and she about blew her top. It's fine. I'm like, look, even the best clinics, sometimes there's just going to be something expired. But that's our job to make sure that doesn't happen when the surveyor shows up. Basically what happens, if you get a standard of deficiency, they're not going to immediately pull your RHC status. You get the opportunity to write a plan of correction, and then show that you're doing it. And if it's a severe enough deficiency, they'll come back and recheck your clinic. But essentially, they're not going to pull your status as long as you're doing the things that you need to do to stay a rural health clinic. If you have a generic policy binder, so if we have provided you with kind of our baseline, make sure that it's true to what you're actually doing in your clinic. So when we ask you to look at those policies, that's what we're asking you to do. We're asking you to read that, and wherever it's not what you do, let's fix it, and then we'll make it your policy. If you already have policies in place, we'll use your policies and put into this binder. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel. You don't need any extra policy binders to follow if we can help it. But we do have to have one that's specific to your RHC. And then we have to do those medical record reviews, even if the state doesn't require it. So that is part of that annual evaluation process. But if your medical directors are already doing them, we can just use those medical record numbers that have already been done. It's not a specific qualitative review, it's just a quantitative review. Look at the record. Are all the things in there that are supposed to be in there? Yes, check, then it's been reviewed. And we're here for you. Just if something comes up that you see, you just let us know, and I will wrap up. Anybody have any questions about compliance? Did I go fast? Yes.
Since I've just been surveyed for the first time, how often do they come by?
Every 6 years, but we've had them show up. Plus or minus 4 months from that 6-year mark. So we want to make sure that you're ready, but we'll be there for you when they come back. Other questions? Okay. Lauren, are you next? Susan, are you next? I don't know who's next. Susan. So I'll get to introduce to you our lovely Susan Porter, who we are so happy to have on our team, and hopefully she'll make emergency preparedness fun again.
You don't want the tabletop, but you want it second, right? So I put out cookies back there if anybody wants to grab a cookie. And there's other snacks up there. We'll turn this where I can see it. So how many of you have emergency preparedness plans in place and you feel all your staff know what they're supposed to do anytime there's an event? How many has a manual in place? How many knows what's in your manual? Okay, that's a start. That's good. We'll go with that. So, all right, is that better? Y'all hear me now? So, in 2016, they did send out a set of requirements that everybody would be prepared and you would train in case an emergency happened. So that's what this rule is about. It has emergency plans, it has the policies, procedures, communication, and then the testing. So we're going to go through all of this. So the big thing you want to do is you want to assist your providers where they will adequately be prepared in case there is a need with the patients or your staff if an emergency happens. So, they have to set rules so that not just one agency is prepared, but everybody's prepared. So there's different requirements for hospitals, long-term care facilities, medical clinics, dialysis clinics. So they want everybody in the community that's providing health care to be prepared. So we want to make sure that everybody is safe, right? You want to make sure your staff is safe. You want to make sure that you are able to continue your business. You want to keep your doors open, right? And you want to protect your building. Those are very important things. What about your equipment? You've got a lot of money invested in that equipment, so you want to protect it. So it's always better in time to repair the roof is when the sun is shining. Now, y'all have had a lot of rain, right? Anybody have any roof leaks? Good. So see, you've got it prepared. But you don't want to wait until that emergency happens and then say, oh, what am I supposed to do? Where am I supposed to go? Where am I supposed to evacuate my patients to? Where's the safe room in our clinic? So we want to prepare for those things beforehand. So the goals is to look at that and try to identify the gaps. How can we prepare? Let's be coordinated about it. Let's have an emergency preparedness process. And we want to make sure that it's not just you out there doing it, that you're working with the ones in your county. If an event happens, it's a local event. If a tornado hits your town, it's a local event before it becomes a state event or a federal event. So you have to know those folks in your county. You have to know those folks that you're working with or would be working with if a disaster happens. So what is your emergency preparedness program? What do you have? You have a manual. So what's in it? Your mock disasters, your drills, training. That's right. What else is in it?
Procedures for what you will do to reach patients and patients to reach you and your staff to reach each other.
That's right. How do you communicate with each other? How are they going to know what's going on? What's your procedures for things you're going to do? Right. So all that is, you're looking at the health, you're looking at the safety and the security needs of what you're going to need for your staff as well as your patients if an event happens. So it consists of several different components. It has the assessment and the emergency planning. It has your policies and procedures. It has a communication plan, which is very important, and also the training and testing. So how many have done risk assessments? Who knows what I'm talking about when I say a risk assessment? Hazard vulnerability assessment, HVA, right? You have to have that. And we're going to talk about that a little bit further, but you're going to anticipate what is going to happen. What's the most common events that happen in our community? We want to keep our doors open, right? So we want to be prepared for those events. So the HVA is where you actually look at what are those hazards that are more common in our area. Are we going to deal with a volcano in Tennessee? We're not, are we? What about a tsunami? Is that something we're going to prepare for? No. But what about flooding? What about thunderstorms, strong winds, tornadoes? All those things are things we're going to prepare for. So you look at your community. They're natural, man-made, and facility emergencies. That's what we're looking at. So they've recently added emerging infectious diseases. Now, how many of y'all have heard about Zika, Ebola, flu, influenza? Been in the news in the last several years, all of those. So they have just this year added that there has to be emerging infectious disease annex, or that has to be one of those things that's covered as well. So that's a new addition to that. So when you complete, how many have done an HVA? How many have done their risk assessment? Okay. So there's a couple of different forms that you can use. The Kaiser there, it's two different forms. These are the sites for them that you can go get them and then just fill them out. You can download those. There's the second one. They've come out with the revision. So if you go to the revised site, instead of it being on 5 or 6 pages, it's all on one page and just a big column of them. And what they're both going to do is they're going to identify your top 10 risk there in your community. Now, what's maybe a risk in Crockett County where I live may be different than somewhere up in East Tennessee. There may be some differences. So you want to complete this every year. The highest score is going to be your highest risk. And then you'll need to address those risks. This is kind of tells you how they score it. You have to kind of look at your risk, look at how you're going to make that decision. Is it something that you know could happen? Do you know that there's flooding around your clinic? when you get 5 or 6 inches of rain? Do you know there's been a tornado in your area? You know, what, did it happen 4 or 5 years ago, or do y'all have strong winds all the time? The probability of that, if it's high risk, you know, you had a big tornado last year in your area, then you're going to be at a higher risk than someone that hasn't had a tornado in their area ever. Does that make sense? So that kind of shows you how to rank those as you're going through the risk. And then the preparedness response scoring, a 3 is the low risk, and a 1 is a high risk for that. So this is one of the examples. This is the natural occurring events. So you can see how it just has those that natural, and look at the very bottom. You got your epidemic there, so that kind of adds those emerging infectious diseases there. This is the other one that's revised. You see it's all on one page, and then you just rank those scores in there.
What, Susan, sorry,
Yes,
what does it say over there?
it's the different risk. This one has like,
Give me a couple of the examples that it says on there, I'm sorry, I can't see it.
okay, it has like fire.
Okay.
It has like tornado.
Okay.
It has tsunami. So it's your different hazards. And so what you're doing is looking at that. Is this something that we're going to see in our area? Have we seen it? Or what is the probability that we'll see it? And what's the probability if we see it that it's going to cause damage? Basically, that's what you're looking at.
It's on the boat.
It is. This one is, the revised one. So what are your top 10 risks? Those are the things that you're going to really want to prepare for in your clinic. So what does your plan look like? Got to review it and update it annually. It's got to be based on your documented risk assessment. So when you do your HBA, that gives you your risk, your top 10 risk, that you need to make sure is included in your emergency preparedness plan. You can have other risks in there as well, but you need to have those in there. So what are you going to do? What's your clinic going to do if that happens? You're also going to look at your hazards, and then what events are going to happen if that hazard happens. What are you going to do if you have a tornado warning? The sirens are going off. Where are you going to go? Where are you going to get your patients?
And that can be different by location. So if you have a clinic that, or if you have multiple clinics,
Right.
you might have a train track going behind one of them, and that might not be the case with the other one. If that train derails, you've now got a risk that the other clinic doesn't have. So you want to make sure that you do that per site.
Per site.
You can't do it just one off. Make sure, because it could be different.
It very well could be different.
What, increasingly in my office, I'm a pediatrician, we have assault by the children against the caregivers, as well as we have flight risk for children who are autistic. Is that on the list?
I mean, if it's something that you're having to deal with, and
We call the cops about once every 2 months.
and then you may want to put something in there if you suspect this or you have that. This is what you're going to do, where your staff will be aware of that.
That might be covered under like an active shooter or somebody
Very
like
well
that.
could.
Susan, they can't hear online, so just, if you don't mind just repeating to make sure that.
Okay.
Document.
So as we go on, we look at the patient population. What type of services can you provide? What are you going to do to continue your service as emergency happens? Who is going to be in charge if your administrator or your medical director or your lead staff is not there when emergency happens? So all those things are considerations that you have to look at. And make sure that your staff is prepared and know that they're going to have that responsibility. So a delegation of authority is one of the things that you have to look at, and you want to pre-plan for those leadership roles, because can you always be in the clinic all the time? Things happen where we have to be out. We're not always available. So we have to make sure that if a decision needs to be made on behalf of the clinic, that there are people there that can make that decision. So you need to identify those. It also says that we have to look at our community partners and make an effort. Shannon kind of addressed this a little bit earlier. If a disaster happens in your community, you're not going to be in that disaster by yourself, right? More than likely, there's going to be other agencies that are going to be involved in it as well. Other people are going to be involved in it. So it's better to know who your EMA is, to know who your sheriff or police are. Does everybody know that in their counties? Already have a good working relationship with them? Good. Because they're gonna depend on you, but what are you gonna be able to provide for them? Where are patients gonna go if there's an earthquake and they're hurt? They're gonna come to your doors, right? They're gonna wanna get medical treatment. And so you're gonna be providing a service in that disaster, and so it's important that you do work together. And again, as Shannon mentioned, you wanna document all your efforts. That's one of the things the surveyor's looking at. Yes, you've called the EMA director 5 times to tell them you need a community drill, but you've got that documented. You've shown that effort. So we've got to develop and implement emergency preparedness policies and procedures based on your plan, your assessment, and then a communication plan. And again, that has to be reviewed and updated yearly. At a minimum, the policies and procedures, you have to have safe evacuation from the clinic. So you have to make sure that you have those lighted exit signs and those maps on the back of your clinic room doors that show your floor layout so that your patients will know, how do I get out of this clinic if the power goes out? And where do I go? You have to know where you're going to meet if you need to get outside the building. Does everybody know? Does all your staff know where you're going to evacuate to if you have to leave your building? Do you know who's going to check the front room or who's going to check the clinic rooms to make sure that everybody's out? And how do you know everybody's out of your building? Do you know who's there?
Something that came up in the emergency preparedness workshop we just went through is when your patients sign in, they might have people with them, but you don't have that documented. So if mama comes in with one sick kid and there's 3 other kids in there, how do you know your clinic is clear? If your policy is just to grab the sign-in sheet, right? Gosh, there might be more people in your clinic than just on that sign-in sheet. So just something to think about when you're putting this together, again, because in the moment of panic, you just want to be able to go to that policy. So we aren't trying to burden you with you really have to do all these, but it really is, it's real that an earthquake could happen. It's real that a tornado could hit your building or fire. So how do we know that our clinic is clear?
Shannon was just mentioning that you have, and I'm just going to repeat this for online, is that you may have multiple people come in with a patient, and you want to make sure that if a disaster happens, that you make sure that you've got everybody out. You have to think about that because not everybody is going to have their name on that sign-in list.
That's a really hard thing to do because we have frequently 3 or 4 patients at a time. If one will go outside and smoke, and you don't have any way to keep up with that. It's
Right.
impossible.
So it was stated that there's usually 4 or 5 people in the clinic at a time, and one may go out to smoke, and it's really hard to keep up with that. So you have your staff designated to search certain areas to make sure that there's no one in that area. All the clinic rooms are checked, the bathrooms are checked, the front lobby's checked to make sure that they are people that are out of the area if they need to be.
Robbie, is that how you got yours set up in zones, Robbie? You have yours set up in zones, right? Her policy is really good. She has hers set up in zones where this person checks that zone, and then when she runs her drill, she intentionally hides people to make sure they're all on. Does that make sense? So you run a drill and intentionally put somebody in a room that they might or might not check, just to make sure that the people are making sure those areas small are easy to clear. If you've got a larger facility, it may not be so easy. You know, so we don't want a kid to get scared when they hear a siren and then they've disappeared and we don't know where they are.
So Shannon was just mentioning about one of the clinics that has their clinic based off in, or divided off into zones and different staff assigned to the different areas. And when they run the drills, they try to hide those patients or hide those sheets of smiley faces or whatever in those areas, so everything is checked. So you have to have a means of sheltering in place. Do y'all know what sheltering in place means? Everybody? Good. Yeah, I'm gonna throw candy in a minute. Yes, exactly. So you have to, if you have to remain in your facility, staff there, patients there, do you have supplies? What do you have in your clinic? Do you have water? In case you're there for a while? Do you have flashlights? Does everybody have flashlights in their clinic rooms? Power goes out, are you gonna be able to see? Everybody have emergency lights that are gonna come on and light the hallways? What about in those clinic rooms? Is emergency lights in there?
Everything I've read about sheltering in place, they're talking about long periods of time, you know, more than a day, which most of us aren't prepared to really do anything with that. It's just going to be an afternoon or during a storm or something
Right.
like that.
Yeah, a lot of times you do read where it is long-term. You plan for 3 days, you have enough food and drinks and all that kind of stuff for 3 days. But again, with your medical clinics, hopefully it's not going to be that long of a time. It may be a couple of hours. It's according to what's happening. It may turn out to be longer if it's a big event. It may take several hours. And so, you know, I don't want you to go out and buy 25 cases of water to have there. That's crazy. But you do have to look at what you're going to need. Stop and think about if you were going to have 10 people in your clinic or 20 people in your clinic for 2 or 3 hours, what are you going to need, especially if there's been a disaster? You have to have a system of medical documentation that preserves the patient's information. Now, is everybody on electronic medical records? Pretty well. Are they backed up somewhere off-site? Can you get to them? Have another source? Okay, because you have to be able to get to your medical records. What about if the power's down, the internet's down, and you're seeing patients? Do you have a paper record you could use? Okay, make sure you have a paper record that you can use. What about volunteers? If a disaster happens, do you have volunteers that are going to show up? We had a tornado that hit a nursing home several years ago. And I was one of the volunteers that showed up because one of my best friends was the administrator. And I knew that when that tornado hit that nursing home, they were going to need help. But, you know, we just rode up in the back of a truck and got up there because power lines were down, the lights were out. There was no systematic way of checking volunteers. But if a disaster happened, do you think people in your community are going to come to help you? They probably would. You may know who those nurses or doctors are in your county. Y'all know that? What if Dr. Smith came up and said, I'm a doctor, I've got a stethoscope around my neck, but is he really? You don't know him. And that could happen in a disaster, right? So if you're going to use volunteers, you have to have a policy whether you're going to use volunteers or not use those. If you're not, just put in your policy you're not going to use volunteers. If you are, then you're going to need to identify them beforehand if you know who they are, or the state has a medical reserve corps which has medical and non-medical volunteers. It's a great resource for you to use. They're credentialed, licensed, and all before they're put into that reserve corps. So that's another access for you. You may just say, hey, we're going to have the volunteers to show up underneath the big tree outside, and we'll go from there. But you do have to talk about volunteers. You have to have a communication plan. How many of you have ham radios in your clinic? One? Great.
She's probably the furthest from help.
Yes, yes. What's going to happen if the big earthquake comes or, say a big tornado comes through? You think our cell phone towers are gonna be up? Y'all remember the Gatlinburg fires? They burnt the cell towers down. They were gone, so there was no cell service. That possibly could happen, so we have to have a way to communicate. Have to have a plan to communicate with your local folks. You may have walkie-talkies in your clinic. Anybody have walkie-talkies in your clinic? Sometimes that may be good to talk from one side to the other. The intercom system may be down. Phone system may be down. Sometimes through your EMA, there's ham radio operators in your county that could possibly be a great resource for you, because if a big disaster happens, more than likely ham radios are going to be the only thing that's going to be out there communicating.
And one point to make too, earthquake, so we think about Madrid Fault in West Tennessee, but East Tennessee is just as likely to get hit. So you don't think about it as a regular, but the faults have been very active.
Yeah.
So we want to be prepared if something happens.
Shannon was just talking about earthquakes happening in West Tennessee, but they could also cause effects anywhere else. So with the communication plan, it says that we must name contact information for our staff, those that are providing services under contract or agreements, any other physicians, any other medical offices or RHCs, any volunteers that you know of. You have to have that contact information for them. You want to know who your state partners are. What about TEMA, Red Cross, any other resources that you're going to want to know for your community? And you can have it on your computer, but if the power's down, is that going to help you to find those numbers? So you want to have your printed copy of as well, and you can put it in your manual and have it there. You want to make sure that you have an alternate means of communication with your staff. Everybody knows our cell number. We text them, right? You may have them in a group or whatever, but is there another number you can call for them? Is there another way you can get in touch with them? Any other addresses? And again, look at, do you need a weather radio? Does everybody have the little Nixle that gets the weather alerts? Or I know there's several across the state. If your county has that, you need to sign up for that to make sure. Usually everybody gets those weather alerts on your phone, right? Does everybody get those? Okay.
For those of us who have kids on ball teams, there's new technology that you may not know about. There's a thing called Remind, and it's free. There are ways that you can do a mass text to your people. You can just go ahead and set it up in your phone so that if you as owners or medical directors need to immediately shoot an information as opposed to trying to make a list where it's going to text everybody and then everybody responds and it texts everybody back and all that, you can just shoot one remind text and it will go to everybody without a return receipt or whatever.
So we just got surveyed recently. They walked through and she had asked, she was drilling me and said, what if the cell phone towers go down? Of course, if it takes our internet down, it won't work. But a lot of times the cell phone tower gets taken in a tornado. Hopefully my Wi-Fi didn't or my internet. We have a Facebook group that has all of our employees, 69 of the 73 that are in there that have Facebook, and so it'll come across. So that's a way of notification if they had internet connection, we can contact them that way. So besides, because it's Google and the text if that tower got turned down. So the group message wouldn't work.
Yeah. A lot of times a text will go through where a phone call will not. So that's something to remember. Shannon was talking about the Remind app that you can do, that you can send a mass email out. And then one of the clinics was talking about how they had been surveyed and they use Facebook, have a group for that. So again, look at those ways, come up with those different ways of communicating with each other. So what about HIPAA? Have you heard that if a disaster happens, HIPAA goes out the door? I've heard that before. That's not really the truth. It does permit that certain disclosures can happen. If you're trying to assist with notifying about a family member, personal representative, or others, about their location and the condition, that's permissible. Within the communication plan, we also have to have information about what your needs are and what you can provide to that community. What are the services that you're going to be able to assist them with? So one of the things I wanted to mention before we go into the training is, so think about if your clinic was hit with a tornado. How are you going to get what you need out to your EMA? You know, if something major happens, the EOC is going to be set up in your town, right, or your county. And so you're going to need to have to communicate with them to say, hey, I need more medical supplies. I've used all my dressings. I've got more patients coming in. They're going to be asking for that. So that's something you want to have that relationship built with them, that you can be able to provide that information to them and they know, hey, we're gonna be asking for this. So with training, it says you have to have initial training about emergency preparedness. Has everybody done that with your staff, your new employees? So be sure if you haven't, you can do that. You can have them read through your emergency plan. Make sure that they know what their role is in that plan. And then as you have new staff come on, make sure that it's in their orientation plan.
Can I make a statement on that real quick?
Yes.
We had surveyors show up at a clinic and they had it. They had done it. They had the manual. They had all the documentation. They had every single employee sign off on it. The surveyor showed up. They were slammed. They had a part-time person go with the surveyor. Owner was out of town. We were out of town. It was just one of those things that happened. That surveyor wrote a tag on every single one of the emergency preparedness. How many tags was it, Lauren?
It was, 17 to 20.
17 tags.
I think the plan of correction was, we had to write was 35 pages.
35 pages plan of correction. And a plan of correction, you almost have to way overdo what you didn't do. So it was severe. So you can do all of this, but if your people don't know it, it's not going to help you. So just make sure, especially if you're preparing for survey, and we'll talk about it one off, but that your people know, that they understand, and they say, okay, did you do this earthquake drill? Because the surveyor just looked at this person and said, so show me your emergency plan, and the girl just said, I don't know. She had signed off. Her name was on the sign off, trained. So just make sure. So again, with the training, make sure that everybody understands the policy, their role, and then again, complete it with orientation for new staff. You have to have the training annually. You can determine what you want to focus on for that annual training, as long as it's within your plan and your risk assessment. So this year, you may want to talk about what you're going to do if you have to evacuate your clinic. You may, next year you may want to talk about, okay, where's our shelter in place? What are we going to do if we have to house 10 people for 3 hours? How are we going to keep them? What are we going to do in a tornado? And then you want to look at what lessons have been learned, and then you may need to make some changes with your plan. When you practice that plan, if it doesn't work right, or you're not covering all the areas, then you may need to make some changes. Documentation is very important, like it is with everything else. So if you do any training, make sure that you have a sign-in sheet that verifies that that person is there, your employee's there, and date it, have them sign it, and put it with your training material. I know a lot of you may use online training. How many of y'all use online training for different things? So that's fine, just document that. You also have to demonstrate the knowledge that they have. So that may be a test or brief questions, or it may be them writing something down about it. Like I said, a lot of times the computer training will have something, a little test that they can do. So just make sure that you have all that documentation.
So what about the testing? I know Shannon's covered that a little bit about the exercises and the drills. So you have to conduct an exercise to test the emergency plan at least annually. And you have to have 2 exercises or 2 actual events. Let's hope we don't have 2 actual events, right? We don't want to have to do that. So with this, you want to look at your risk, and then decide what you want to do your exercise on. So you want to participate in a full-scale exercise, and that's just boots on the ground. That's where you're actually doing something. You're actually practicing something. So if you want to say, okay, I'm going to call a tornado drill, and we're going to see, what do we do? Where do we go? Well, you've got windows in 3 of your clinic rooms. Are you going to leave those patients in those clinic rooms with a tornado coming? No, you're going to move them, aren't you? So that's what you want to do. You want to look at that. Now, it talks about a community-based drill, which that means looking with EMA, talking to maybe other medical clinics in your county, seeing what other exercises can be done together. If not, then you're going to do your facility-based. Whatever, the sole responsibility lies on you to be compliant for when that surveyor comes in. So your facility-based, I just kind of wrote out basically what you want to do with facility-based. You want to figure out what you're going to be testing, who all is going to participate, what abilities are you demonstrating, what activities, what are those capabilities. You're going to determine what equipment and personnel is needed. You're going to review your plan and procedure, what your risk is, what hazards. You're going to conduct your exercise, and then you're going to look at what worked and what didn't work. What improvements do we need to make? And then we're going to document that. It also says you have to have a second exercise. It can be a second drill. It could be maybe one actual event. Or you can do a tabletop exercise. And the difference between the drill and the tabletop is where you're just discussing what you're going to do. The drill is what you're actually doing, what you're going to be doing. So when you get finished with all that, is everything going to be great? Did everybody do everything perfect? Did you have everything that you needed to do? No, never. So you want to look at that and see, and you want to document what worked, what didn't work. You have to keep that documentation for 3 years. And again, you may want to look at your plan. If you say, okay, my plan is to go to a certain spot in the office when a tornado is coming, and then you realize, there's windows there, I don't need to go there, then reevaluate your plan. Once the exercise is over, we do what we call a hot wash. Have you ever heard that term before? Hot wash? It's just where you're doing a round table discussion, and you're saying, what worked? What did we do well? What did we not do so good? What do we need to improve? What lessons did we learn? And that's your documentation of that exercise. So they call it an after-action report. And within this after-action report, it basically says what was supposed to happen, what occurred, so what did happen, what worked, what went well, what could we do differently or improve upon, and then a plan with timeliness for incorporating those improvements. So I came up with just some suggestions on completing the testing requirements. I would say identify one of your risks. Do your risk assessment. Identify one of your risks you want to target this year. Do a tabletop discussion on that where you're actually talking about what your facility is going to be doing. Document your questions, look at your problems, then make sure all your staff is aware of the procedures for that event. Then in exercise 2, that's when you do the full scale exercise. So you have your tabletop with the first one where you're talking about it, discussing it, what you're gonna do, and then you're actually doing the exercise. You're practicing what you're talking about. Announce your drill, do your action, complete your drill, and then do the hot wash and evaluate it. And then do the documentation. So I don't know if y'all can see this, but sometimes we get overwhelmed with all the things that we have to do to be prepared. This poor little guy's got so much on him, he's not going to be able to move. Isn't that how you feel sometimes? We have so much that we have to do that we can't do that. So is there any questions about what I've gone over today? One of the things that I've tried to do is develop a template for an emergency plan. And I know I brought Phyllis hers today. It's just a template where you actually go in and it has it all laid out and you add all your specific stuff. So if there's any facility that needs assistance with that, just please let me know. All right, y'all want to walk around a minute before we do the tabletop? Get cookies, water, bathroom break? Anybody?
While y'all are taking a break real quick, I just want to say we participated in one of these. Crockett Medical Clinic had the TEMA director for West Tennessee come to the clinic and had our county emergency, what's his title? Director, the EMA director for our county came to the clinic also. And y'all, it was so great. It was, and had another neighboring rural health clinic also join their team. And it was just, you know, when you go through this, you'll see it was really, really beneficial. So if you don't know your emergency person for your county, it would be worthwhile for you to really try, just invite them to the clinic. Say, hey, we're a rural health clinic. We have to put this plan together. How are we going to integrate into your plan? Because if your plan bumps against their plan, or what if the local, if you have a hospital nearby, what if they're incapacitated? Or what if their plan is to go to the high school, but an earthquake happened and the road is split and they can't get to the high school? What if, like for us in Crockett County, we don't have a hospital. So, could we triage at one clinic? Or what if that clinic's, wiped out? We've got another clinic. Okay, we're going to go over there. But it was a time where they weren't in panic mode to have the conversation. What can we do? And then what can we do together as a community to work together? So it was really fun, and I think you'll really benefit from doing the tabletop with your people. Susan has put together some certificates. So now you have officially been through our emergency preparedness training, so you can document that and put it in your manual. And so she's going to hand out those certificates of completion. So if you're watching online and you have completed this training, let us know and we will get your certificate to you. And she's going to be ready to start shaking in your boots tabletop.
Well, some days I'm a. Oh, speaking of another girl, you know when Lane Ryan, remember Lane Ryan did her? She does it. Wow. If she can do it, I do it. Like, she can't do it. If I'm gone, sort of. Yeah, it ain't coming. Well, yeah, exactly. You good. You're like 20.
Okay, y'all ready to get started back? So I passed out the certificates that you can put in your manuals as part of your training, so that you can show that you've had that emergency preparedness training. So now we're just going to go through a tabletop, like Shannon said that we had done in one of our clinics. This is something you can take back and do in your facility, or talk with your EMA if you want to see if they can come and help. But we thought it would just be easy to go through this and just kind of show you kind of what a tabletop consists of. How many of y'all have participated in a tabletop in the past? A few? Okay. So I call it shaking in my boots, shaking in your boots. So usually the first thing you want to go through is your agenda, which is going to talk about administration safety, what is a tabletop exercise, the exercise itself, the hot wash, and then the questions. So you want to go through the introduction, who your facilitator is, and that's one of the things you have to have with a tabletop is you have to have a facilitator. Somebody that's actually going to be conducting it, talking it through, and guiding you as the players. You will be the players. You always want to do a safety briefing. So if an emergency happens, we do have an exit out the back door, and we have an exit out of this side door here. And then you're going to talk about the administration. So basically, a tabletop is a meeting where you're going to discuss a simulated emergency situation. You're going to talk to the different ones about what you're going to do, discuss the actions, and you're going to test your emergency plan. It's always a low-stress environment, and that's one thing you want to stress to your staff, is this is not something you're going to be tested on. This is where we're going to talk about what's going to happen. So you want it to be a low stress. Your facilitator, they're the ones that's gonna control the exercise, they're gonna keep it on track. And then your participants, your staff, are the ones that are actually gonna be doing the talking and looking at what works, look at the gaps, and trying to make sure that they know everything that they need to do or how they can improve. You're going to respond as a group as the information comes out. You're going to look at your role in that exercise. And some will be more, I guess, injecting more maybe than others. Some people may not feel comfortable participating. That doesn't mean they're not learning, but they may just not be comfortable being very vocal during that. Some of the rules of engagement is you don't want to attack the person if they say something that you don't think is right or whatever. You want to be active and professional. We're here to learn and share information. There's no actual event, so we're going to remain calm. We're going to look at the solutions and the problems. And there's no perfect plan. So again, we want those players to relax, low stress. We want them to respond within their role, is what it would be. We want to allow the artifacts or the information from the scenario, use it as a tool. And then we want to think outside the box. Sometimes we don't have a chance to think outside the box much, do we? So our goal for the exercise is to train and emphasize the role of the medical staff during a catastrophic event. So the objectives, we're going to discuss the exercise, and in the annex, there's an earthquake annex within this medical clinic, within their plan, and so we're going to look and see if how they're going to respond during an earthquake. We're also going to look at communications. No matter what type of emergency is, communications is always going to be a part of that. And then we're going to evaluate our surge and management for the first 24 hours after a major event. So this is the background. In the last census of 2010, there was 14,600 people in this county. 4,066 families reside there. And that's about 55 people per square mile. In the city, there's about 2,400 people with 605 families and over 900 households. So we have approximately 500 people per square mile. There's 4 medical clinics in this county. The medical clinic that we're at employs 22 staff members, and they provide acute, urgent, chronic outpatient medical care services to clients that are children, adults, older adults, and over 85 years of age. So y'all ready to start? See, it's a hot day, 90 degrees. A little bit chance of rain, 20% chance of rain. Wind's blowing a little bit, not much. It's pretty humid outside. So it's 3 o'clock today. A damaging earthquake strikes along the New Madrid seismic zone in the central region of the United States. The epicenter is determined to be approximately 5 miles north-northwest of New Bern, Tennessee. The most damaging shaking occurred in northeastern Arkansas, western Tennessee, the Boot Hills of Missouri, and western Kentucky. Less severe but still damaging shaking continues in an area stretching from St. Louis southward to Memphis, and from Little Rock, Arkansas, east to Dixon, Tennessee. The earthquake was measured at 6.1, making it the largest earthquake to hit the region since 1895. Ground shaking from the main shock lasts for approximately 33 seconds in some areas. And aftershocks of varying intensity are felt throughout the region and causing further damage to structures already weakened by the previous shaking. Tremors are felt as far away as the east coast of the United States, and damage is seen in at least 8 states. Is this a scenario that could happen in Tennessee? Yes. There we are. So as a result of this earthquake, there are more than 30 people with injuries requiring hospitalization in an estimated 4 facilities in the county. Over 100 others received injuries requiring minor medical attention. Most of the injuries are caused by objects like bookshelves, heavy topped furniture, appliances, electronics, all of those falling on people. Other injuries were caused by walking on broken or fallen glass, people who were trying to walk or run during the earthquake, and they were injured by pieces of building falling on them, and they were thrown to the ground, and many suffered broken bones. Less than 100 are missing or separated from their families. We estimated over 50 earthquake victims' homes and possessions are destroyed or damaged, causing many to seek short-term shelter. We are expecting displaced civilians, as well as shortage of essential supplies such as medical supplies, fresh food, bottled water, fuel, and generators. DOT is expecting damaging bridges and roadways in the county. Currently, there's no damage to gas or oil pipelines have been reported, and power is at 50% of the county. Pretty scary, huh? To sum it up, this is what we currently have and are expecting over the next 24 hours. Localized flooding in low-lying areas with riverbed changes along a big river that flows through your county. We have compromised and damaged bridges and overpasses. What about railroad bridges and tracks? They're damaged, as well as buildings and other infrastructure. Possible structural damage to the drinking water treatment plants and the wastewater collection facilities. Power outages as a result of transmission of damaged lines. Communication failure because all cell towers and phone lines damaged. And you have surges at medical facilities. If you look at this, I know it's very hard to see because it's very small. But this is what you would expect. You would expect panel walls thrown out of frames, walls coming down, chimneys coming down, structural damage, utilities would be broken. So in this exercise, this was a layout of the clinic. They had 13 people in the waiting room, 2 people in exam room 1, 1 person in exam room 2, 1 patient in room 3, and 2 patients in room 4. Does that sound like a logical day in your clinic? So this is a scenario. Your facility experienced significant tremors, which resulted in items falling off shelves. Think about your clinic rooms. Think about your offices. Are items going to fall off of shelves? What about your storage room? Movement of non-fixtured furniture and the overturning of medical equipment. Can you see it happening in your facility?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. So this is the first set of questions. So what are your actions? What's the first thing you're going to do? Look at your patients. Look at your staff. See what's working. What?
Clear pathways.
Clear pathways. What else?
Make sure there's not any gas leaks or, oxygen.
Exactly.
Tanks that are, spewing oxygen
Damage.
everywhere.
Check your gas. Look at your oxygen.
And one of the things that came out specifically that it's who is responsible for going to check your gas. That's one thing, you know you're supposed to go do it, but now you're in the middle of something, just chaos. Everybody's gonna think somebody else went and did it. So you've gotta have that designated person and that backup person.
So what's been discussed is who's going to cut off the gas, who's going to check the water. Make sure you have a designated person that's going to do that. Otherwise, it may not get done. Everybody's thinking somebody else is going to do that.
How many people should know how to turn off the gas?
So how many people should know how to turn off the gas? About the water.
Everybody in our facility has to know where they have to go in and they have to know where the gas cutoff is, they have to know where the water cutoff is. And I'm gonna say the water, I've been at this clinic for 6 years, 7 years maybe. We flooded 3 times, two times. And we've had to go outside our facility and find the main water cutoff to stop the water from flooding us. So we make everybody go once a year. They go out. Those cutoffs, they have to go and know where they are. Everybody.
So what they were saying is everybody should know, because who knows who's going to be in the clinic when an event happens, right? May have flooding, need to go and cut that off. So you need to know how to cut the water off, how to cut the gas off. Everybody needs to do that and actually practice doing that.
So you have a scenario set for us, but this is, as you read the scenario off, you've already got all the information about the damage and so forth. That's not the way it's gonna happen. The way it's gonna happen is gonna be mass panic from everybody in the office, first off. Of course, you want the providers and the staff should be the calmest and the least panic. But in an earthquake, you want to get people out of the building. And that should be probably the first priority, because you don't know whether the rest of it's gonna, we know it's a 6.1 and it's on this scale here, it's a 6, so it's gonna have some minor structural damage of it, but you don't know whether it's gonna be an 8.
Right.
So getting them out of the building so that the building doesn't collapse on them is probably the most important thing, right?
Right. Very well could be. Yes, at this point, we don't know. If a real event happens, you don't know what's coming. You don't know if that tremor is the real thing, all of it, or if it's just the first tremor that's coming to the main earthquake that's coming a little bit later, like California experienced. So yes, you have to look at who's in your clinic and let's get them out, especially if you have damage to your clinic and those kind of things. Yes, this is a scenario and it's a planned scenario. So that you can kind of think about those things, but you're right. You're going to get out of your clinic, try to get them out. So, has your agency conducted the HVA? And I think y'all have all done that. Was earthquake included? How many of you had earthquake as your risk? Several? Okay, you should have that included. And have you written a procedure to address earthquake? Do you have that in there? Some do. That should be addressed. What about other hazards? Think about other things that could happen. So many of your patients have begun to panic, right? They've entered the hall, entered into the hallway, the commons area, toward the exit on their own. So this is what you have. You have one exhibiting symptoms of potential heart attack. Would that happen? If you're having an earthquake, do you think somebody'd have a heart attack, possibly? 2 with fractures. 1 unconscious with a head injury. And 5 lacerations from broken glass. So, who's coordinating the response for your team? Medical, taking care of medical? Clerical, checking other things?
Are you making the assumption that all this is gonna happen inside the clinic?
Making the assumption that this has happened inside your clinic.
What I'm saying is, you said after 5 minutes, everybody's kind of wandering around the clinic, and then you're gonna do all this assessment inside the clinic? Or are we agreed we're getting them out of the clinic first and then doing the assessing?
I guess it's according to whether you can get them out or not. You know, are the doorways where you can get
5 minutes, you better.
Yeah.
And I think that's
So you're
something
gonna be
that,
doing all this assessing, and you're gonna need your medical equipment team outside to do it.
You very well could do that. You may have to get out of the building first and then assess out there.
and that's why you gotta do your drills and everybody put their heads together. I think, cause I know when we first did ours, our receptionist people didn't think that they had a role. Well, what can we do? That's gonna be all medical disaster stuff. And it ended up, our receptionist people and our accounting people, they had some of the biggest roles to do as far as trying to organize and get it going and making some decisions and shut down or deciding what you're gonna do. So that's one reason it's important for your whole team to get together and talk about it.
So Robbie was mentioning about the clerical staff. They didn't think they had anything to do, but they have a huge role in helping decide, look at the waiting room, you know, doing different things, making sure the gas cut off, the water's cut off, those kind of things. And again, it's all part of the exercise. It's all part of the drill. This is why we're doing this, where it'll make you think, what am I going to do if this happens in my facility? Am I going to, you know, can I do anything there, or do I need to get the patients out? And it's all according to the event as to what you're going to do.
Right, and if you have power, do you have cell phones? Do you,
Right.
you know, if you have power, it's maybe different. If your building has suffered any structural damages, all these people might start showing up at your clinic because they're injured. So that's all things you've got to figure out. Who calls emergency management? Who calls, you know, all those kinds of things.
Which
Yeah.
brings up another thing, is why it's so important that you work with your county emergency medical people too, because that's kind of something that we did the other day, is we kind of figured out kind of our roles. How are we going to work together? How are we gonna organize all that?
So some of the discussion is this going to be according to your facility, what you're going to do. You know, is your walls up? Is the air on? Is the electricity on? Or do you have extensive damage to your building that you need to get out as soon as you can and get everybody out? And again, work with the EMA to know, and work with your other medical to know what resources are there and what you're going to be able to do. Do you think, what actions would you take in the immediate aftermath? We've kind of talked about that a little bit. And one of the things in the plan, we have to do a delegation of authority. And emergencies may happen when your administrative leads are not there in the building. So you need to make sure that your staff is prepared and knows what they're supposed to do. If you're the lead person and you're not there, somebody's going to have to step up and take a lead. And that may mean that you're 2 or 3 people deep. And to know that, it's real important, because you're going to...
How many of your people are going to be going to get their kids at school, or going to see about their elderly parents? Now you're short-staffed. Or, you know, those kinds of things are real things that are going to happen. You know, or people can't get to work, or wherever it is. So those are just things you need to think through.
But before all that happens, how many of them are gonna stay in the team member, and how many of them are gonna be cut for the exits, and everybody's gonna go?
That's right.
Because if
Right.
you assign somebody, you take all the management material outside so we can manage people up, and that person is prone to panic, then forget the management
Or if you know that was her job and she's gone, or he, then we know that's a job we need to pick somebody else that's gonna have to grab that responsibility. But that's why you have this conversation.
So again, you're looking at, if an emergency happens, are you gonna have staff members that are gonna take out the door to check on their kids or whatever? And a lot of times that happens, right? When something happens, I gotta go check on my family. And we know that people work better when they know their family's okay. And so again, you have to look at those responsibilities, such as moving the medical bandaging and stuff outside, whose that responsibility is, and if that person's not there, somebody else has to pick that up and do that. So as an hour has passed, do you think changes are going to happen in an hour? All immediate first aid issues have been stabilized or evacuated. The electricity is working, but your phone system and cell phones are not working. And here we have 4 people that have left to go check on their family. And so now you are severely understaffed. So residents are beginning to come to your clinic. Do they do this when something happens? Do people surge to your clinic? Just like sometimes if the power's out, people go to the hospital because they know the hospital's going to have power and electricity and air and all those kind of things. Currently, there's 22 patients in the waiting room along with family members. You have 16 people with cuts, abrasions, and lacerations. You have 2 patients with respiratory problems. You've got 2 patients with fractured legs. And you've got 2 head injuries, and they're very confused. Do you see these types of injuries coming in after an earthquake? Especially if you've got parts of buildings falling off and bookcases falling over and chimneys falling down. Definitely. So what is your plan to address the surge of patients? Do you have a plan? And Robbie, if you're going to talk, I want you to talk in this. What? I said, if you're going to talk, I want you to come up here and talk in this.
I'll be quiet.
So what is your plan? What's going to happen? What's going to happen if you have all those patients show up in your waiting room? Are they going to do that? Now, you may have evacuated out to your parking lot, but they're going to still show up on your facility, right? At your facility, whether you're inside the building or you're outside the building. If you're outside the building, you're going to have to come up with a way that you're going to kind of triage these patients and see who's the first one I'm going to look at in that list of injured patients. What can you stabilize until EMS can get there? Can EMS even get to you? Or is it going to be a while before they get some rovers or whatever out there to get you?
In the county I live in, too. I don't know how many ambulances y'all have, but if we've got 22 people, and their families, you're talking about a lot of people that have to trust your clinic. And again, we've got different sized clinics in here, but what's that going to be like? And if you're the owner and the healthcare provider, you can't be out there triaging and deciding who gets sent in or out or not. So you've got to make sure that people know what their role is, and that's why we're doing this. But we had said, okay, we're going to have the front desk is going to be in charge of assessing at the front, and then only deciding these ones need to get sent in and send them in if you're still seeing patients inside, as an example. Or are you going to partner with your EMA, and they have these pop-up tents? Are they going to show up in your clinic, pop them up on your parking lot, or are they going to go to the high school or whatever the case may be in your area? So those are conversations. Every clinic is different, so you need to decide what's best for your team, and then make sure everybody knows their role.
Keep in mind, you might be on your own, especially in smaller counties. In a widespread event like an earthquake, every county's going to have their own problem, so you're not going to get help from somewhere else. So you're going to be on your own.
That's right. So the statement was that you're going to be on your own, and that's true. And with emergency preparedness, they tell you to plan for being on your own for 72 hours because you don't know who's going to be able to get there and what other needs are going to be going on. So again, as you're looking at how you're going to plan to surge this, whether you're in your building or you're out in the parking lot, you still got to do the same thing. You've got to have your staff that's going to work together. And whether you're triaging out on the front, you're going to have maybe your clerical group to look at those and see who's immediate need, and then keep them outside if you can do that. Again, I'm trying to refresh what you were saying, Shannon. And then if there are other patients that have more immediate needs, they can go into the clinic and be triaged there rather than everybody going into the clinic.
And maybe you already have a policy, we're gonna let one family member go back, but we're not gonna let the whole family. You see, but you need to know that before the emergency happens, then you got 100 people in your clinic that you can't, you got chaos.
Well, that's where volunteers come in.
Right.
Security or
Right.
something like that.
So the statement was, you may have 100 people come in, you may have 5 family members come in with one patient, and you may not want to let all them in. That's where volunteers can come in to help, and that's right. You can definitely do that. You're also going to have people to show up to say, is my family member here? I don't know if they were hurt. I don't know where they are. I can't reach them. The cell phones are down. Are they hurt? I'm going to check at the clinic. So again, you're going to have a surge of those worried well people that come in that are checking on family members. So again, think about how you're going to do that. What actions your team's going to take. And what are about your staffing issues? You've already got 4 of your staff people to leave to go check on their family. Now you're understaffed, but you're being surged by patients. So think about that. Who can you pull in? Your volunteers, whatever. So think about how you're going to do that. What about if you have staff that are off that day? You're going to call them in. Do they know if an emergency happened that you need them to come in to the clinic? So that's something to have a discussion about. Well, I was off. I can't help an earthquake happen. I was off.
Or maybe we're gonna go in shifts. Hey,
Yeah.
this group of people, y'all go check on your families, y'all try to get back here in 30 minutes, and as soon as they're back, y'all all can go, or
Right.
whatever, so that we can.
So you may have to do in shifts. What Shannon was saying is you may have to work in shifts. Everybody come in, then this group goes see about your family and come back in 3 or 4 hours, where we're going to rotate that. Because can you work 24 hours for several days?
No.
Can anybody do that? You don't want to. You probably have done it, yes. But do you want to do it again? It's not the ideal situation, is it? Yeah.
It's called internship.
That's right. It's called internship. That's correct. So now you're 12 plus hours into the incident. Since the initial incident, there have been 2 more aftershocks causing damage and more injuries. The flow of patients continue all evening. Do y'all see this really happening if we had a major earthquake? Yes, I see it definitely happen. So how many days can your facility operate with a supply of equipment that you have? If it's you can't order any more gauze, bandages, gloves. How long can your facility stay open and be able to maintain with your supply that you have? Something to think about. So what actions would be necessary to provide medical assistance to your county's residents? What other threats do you see with the term sustainment? You're going to run out of supplies pretty fast, aren't you? So what are you going to do? You already have a relationship with EMA, right? You've already talked to them. You already know. They know you're a medical facility. They know you're going to be treating those sick. They know, hey, my plan is if I have to come out of this building, I'm going to be out in the parking lot. I need you to bring me a tent. It's 90 degrees out here. People are going to be getting dehydrated. They're scared. They're having heart attacks, all this kind of stuff.
Well, some of us have a hospital closed, and some of us don't.
Right.
Well, and some of us as EMS emergency people won't call us back, so we don't have a relationship.
Yeah, I understand. I know. The statement was, I don't have a relationship because they won't call me back. I definitely understand that.
Some of the Baptist churches have a disaster response.
Right.
team.
Right.
Just so
So you know.
Some of the Baptist churches have a disaster response team. It'd be a great person to partner with them to say, hey, you're not going to really be deployed the first minute an earthquake happens. We have a medical clinic. Well, I may need you to come help. You already know what you're supposed to be doing. You've been trained through that Baptist association because you go off and help with disasters. So that would be an excellent resource. I understand sometimes you don't get phone calls back, but you have to keep trying to make that relationship happen. So now we've kind of finished the exercise. We've talked about the areas that we wanted to talk about. So now you want to think, what are the 3 strengths that we have during this scenario? What are 3 areas of improvement? Can y'all think of 3 strengths that you have? What about 3 improvements? Think right off, oh, I need to make sure my oxygen is secured. I need to make sure, that big machine sitting up on that top shelf doesn't fall off and hit me on the head right over my desk. I need a ham radio. I need something, some way to communicate. What additional planning efforts were needed? What supplies don't have expiration dates? Exactly, none. What about community partners do I need to plan? You can't get a call back from your emergency folks. Go knock on their door.
But if it hits one of us in this room, could y'all not have, if your plan at some point, contact Emmaus Consulting, find out where the other people are? I mean, because if Northwest Tennessee is hit, Southwest Tennessee might be fine and be able to provide resources and extra help, or vice versa. If you're in Middle Tennessee, we might be okay over here and we can help share. You see what I'm saying? That could be part of it.
So Shannon was saying, look at your resources.
That's what we have together.
Yeah.
That other clinics don't have. You don't have to be all alone.
Right. So look at your other resources. Contact, one of us. Some up in East Tennessee may could help those in West, or we could help those in Middle because we're not affected. So that's all part of communicating and having a plan. So again, look at your other community partners and how they're going to, everybody's going to be responding, right? If this is a major disaster, everybody's going to be responding. And so you want to make sure that they know you're there and you're seeing the patients and you're doing medical. And they should realize that. And also you want to look at what additional training do I need? Do we need to actually practice this? Okay, we're going to go through and check all the rooms and end up by the big tree in the south end of the parking lot? And actually practice that and do that. So once you go through the tabletop, then you can actually have your drill, your boots on the ground, where you're actually saying over the loud intercom or an email or whatever that you're sending out to say, now we've just had a 6.1 or 7.3 or 2.6, whatever kind of earthquake you want, and it's happening right now. But you've got to have that training and you've got to have that practice. They've got to know what's going to happen, or they're all going to be, like Robbie said, in the waiting room trying to figure out what am I supposed to do.
And if you do that tabletop and then you do the exercise, that counts for your 2 things you've done.
Right.
So remember that. Because remember, you got to have 2 right now until we hear otherwise. Doing the tabletop and then hitting the drill takes care of that. Or if something happens at your facility and you document what happened, document what you learned, that can count. Like you had a car go through the front of somebody's clinic. You got a car on fire in your waiting room. What do you do? I mean, you don't plan for that, but it happened, and so now what did we learn? So, somebody's clinic was flooded and we can't get to it. What do we do?
Or I think our computers went out for 3 hours. That was.
Yeah, so what's our plan? We document that, put it in our manual, and then that will cover.
Yeah, any of those risks that have been identified, which power outage is definitely one of those. Then if that happens and you have to implement your emergency plan, then you can count that, write that up, and count that as a real event. So we've had the tabletop. You can do the same kind of question scenario with any type of risk, and then do your exercise And that counts as your 2 exercises for that year. As long as you go through all the components and you write up the 3 things, strengths and the weaknesses and improvements, and then make any improvements that you need. Does anybody have any questions?
It seems to me that the planning, of course, you do your risk assessment, but, so, in Middle Tennessee, we're at low risk there is some aftershock from earthquakes, we do feel some of the tremors that are coming that way, but we're not gonna probably have anything major. We're not gonna have a hurricane, so we don't need to have 3 weeks worth of water in the place. But, tornadoes are our biggest problem in our area. And
Exactly.
probably that's gonna be limited to a small tract, it's not gonna be widespread, so you wouldn't have to be as prepared for a tornado as you might have to be, for the earthquake scenario, Mr. Gibbons, because in an earthquake, all these communities may become isolated communities, and as a consequence of that, then they have to fend for themselves, and their plans should be much more extensive than our plans would be.
Well, you wouldn't necessarily have earthquake as high on your HVA, so that wouldn't be one of the things you prepped for.
Right.
But yours might be power outage, yours might be fire, yours might be active shooter, some kind of mass casualty event like that may be different for your area.
One thing, like, I know, y'all have a clinic in Manchester, correct?
Yeah, we have an office in Manchester.
Okay, so, how many people come to Bonnaroo? Okay, so for 3 days, your county's population jumps by 80,000. What is the role your clinic would play if you had a active shooter or a bomb or several years ago the big thing was anthrax. We had all the health departments stocking up on Cipro because of anthrax, but so while an earthquake might not be something for that location, mass casualty is a potential there because, and I think there's another festival coming up.
Hopefully they're not bringing their kids to it, but they're the closest clinics. They're pediatric clinics.
But if you're treating, if you're treating the walking wounded, it's not gonna matter if you're a pediatrician or not. You can probably at least keep me from dying maybe, or triage me and pass me off. But
I've been through hurricanes in the past, and the interesting thing about that is you evacuate, get out of there if you can, and you should, and listen to the authorities. And the ones that stay behind, they're out of touch with anybody for 5 or 6 hours until the hurricane passes. But then it's the second and third day that you need a lot of emphasis on medical care, because you got snake bites and people who get into poison ivy and people who get fire ants and all the other stuff that goes with, and people who have heat stroke and that kind of thing. But most of those people end up at the hospital, not in they wouldn't end up in a pediatric clinic, I don't think. We might. So what I did in those situations is I gravitated to the hospital and worked in the hospital as triage and doing minor care for people. But it's different in each location. But the Bonnaroo thing, we don't have a lot of kids that go to Bonnaroo, but thank goodness.
But when you become part of when you become a rural health clinic, you become part. You're required by law to become part of
that community,
that emergency preparedness community. So, you may have to be asked to do something that's not in your.
Which we can do. I mean,
yeah, and so that's the whole purpose of this is to. As you can see, we've had a pretty good discussion here.
Or the tent city or something like that.
But if someone gets on some kind of crazy drugs and decides to drive their 4-wheel drive truck across the crowd, that's gonna be more than Manchester Hospital can take care of, right? I mean, so those are the, did, hey, we talked to emergency management, this is how many patients we can take, or whatever, you know, we have some kind of a plan in place, that if there was something like that, we can do it. You know, some places have dams close by. What happened if you have a major dam? I mean, if, you know, terrorists come in and blow the dam up, I mean, what, or what, you see what I'm saying? Earthquake happens and the train derails, things that you just wouldn't normally, that's the idea, they're trying to prompt you to think about what's the worst case scenario in your area.
One of the things I said first is think outside your box. You know, we do our routine thing every day. We know how to handle those things that we do every day, but we don't know what's coming tomorrow. We don't know what some strange person may come up and do or what event may happen. So we have to think about that. We're not going to have the answers for everything. You're not going to have all the answers either. But if a major event happens in your county, you are going to be expected to provide medical services. You know that. And so what you can do is just plan and prepare the best way you can. No, you may not have everything you need, but I can sustain my staff and I can sustain patients until hopefully they can either get more people in, or we're, bringing in more staff, or opening up a shelter somewhere that's providing medical care, or getting the Baptist in to do their medical treatment or whatever. So you've got to try to look at that and look at your risk, because each county is going to be different. Each clinic is going to be different as to what your risk is, and that's why you have to do that risk assessment to see what does happen here. What is my risk? Is there interstate, right by my office that goes right in front of it that a truck could turn over and spill poisonous fumes, out, or liquid out? I mean, you have to look at all of that and see, and then just try to plan the best you can. But if you go through these and have that, then your staff is going to be better prepared. You may know what to do, but you've got to make sure that your staff understands what they're supposed to do. And if you do more training, I think it's going to make your staff feel better and feel more comfortable if they kind of know what their role is and how you can plan. And open that door of discussion. Sometimes staff feels like they can't say anything because maybe their ideas are not what you want it to be, or it may be something totally different. But you've got to think outside that box, because if emergency happens, that's where we're going to be, right? We're not going to be in that day-to-day routine that we deal with. All right, thank y'all.
I also have a certificate for y'all for having that too, so.
Y'all just perform a tabletop, give yourself a name.
Y'all want to take a break? I'm the last one. You made it.
the best for last.
Yeah.
No, you didn't dance on a tabletop, you performed a tabletop.
What's the difference?
You get a certificate one for one and dollar bills for the other.
Who says emergency? Alright, it's 3:46, how many minutes do you think, Lauren?
How many minutes? Break? 5 minutes? What are you talking about? go ahead and get started. We'll get this wrapped up hopefully in about 20 or 30 minutes or so. This presentation probably should have been first this morning because we started out.
Rusty just wanted to be first, which threw it all.
Rusty started out, man, we went way deep in the weeds, and I know some folks are relatively new, and I told Rusty, I'm like, man, you were talking about stuff at a microscopic level, and my first slide is, what is a rural health clinic? So,
You can skip that slide.
I'm gonna skip over quite a few, which is why it shouldn't take, yes, hey.
I would like to say one thing. I was the medical director for Christian Family Medicine when we first started, even before. And I remember when Rusty came up to me one day and said, Dr. Armour, I have discovered something. I don't know why more doctors aren't doing this. I said, what are you talking about? He said, rural health clinics. So I remember when he found out about this. It's just kind of exciting to see the evolution.
Yeah, it's hey, you know, and he did learn it all on his own,
Yes, he did.
and learned how to do it well, and then which is why
We're all here.
everybody's here. So we'll get started. This is Rural Health Clinic Essentials. Again, what does it mean that we're an RHC? As an RHC, you're gonna have to meet more requirements than if there's a clinic across the street from you that's not an RHC. Like we just talked about emergency preparedness. There's hoops you're gonna have to jump through to stay in compliance and to reap the benefits of the program. And you know, that involves the rules, it involves the annual evaluation, which we're doing now for most of you that are established. You've got quarterly reporting of your TennCare visits, which is how you collect the extra money. And then you've got annual cost reports that have to be filed. I'm skipping over this because Rusty talked about it. Shannon talked about that. Shannon talked about that. Shannon talked about this. The only thing she didn't mention, if you'll look here, the average provider-based RHC Medicare encounter rate is $140 to $167, while as an independent, it's $84. Which is one thing that RHC Modernization Act is trying to close that gap there. I mean, why is that gap there? I don't know.
And why does your local hospital want to buy your clinic so bad?
Why are children paid less than adults are?
I'm gonna move along. As an RHC, the main difference is you're gonna bill Medicare via Part A, which is something typically only a hospital or nursing home would do. But this allows a primary care clinic to bill Medicare Part A for the office visit. Now, like Rusty talked about this morning, you're going to bill some things to Medicare Part B, your labs and X-rays, ancillary services. Yeah, there's some of the professional component is included in the Part A rate, right? It's the technical component that goes to Part B. Did I say that right?
Yes,
Yes.
I think that's right.
Yeah. Like an EKG has a professional and a technical component. But anyway, this is why you bill on a UB04 instead of that $1,500 like a normal clinic would be. In the past, and Rusty talked about a budgeted rate and initial rates and final rates. If you're not sure what that is, historically your budgeted rate is the first thing you're going to want to do once you get certified as an RHC. You're going to come up with a budget for your clinic for the year, and you're going to turn it in to Medicare and turn it into TennCare and they're gonna set a budgeted rate, a per visit rate for your clinic. Then once a year is up, you're gonna send in a final rate. Now, hopefully your final rate is higher than your budgeted rate, because if it's not, you're gonna owe money back. If they've been paying you, let's say your budgeted rate was $150 a visit, and that's what they've been paying you for the past year, then all of a sudden they set your final rate at $135. Okay, you owe them $15 a visit back. So you want your budgeted rate to be on the conservative side, but you want it to be fair to you, so that the cost and the expenses you put on there allow you to be successful moving forward. Now, TennCare has kind of put that system in limbo because of this moratorium, and so they had quit allowing new RHCs into the Medicaid program. In other words, you could become an RHC, you could bill Medicare as an RHC, but you couldn't bill TennCare as an RHC. They weren't going to accept any more RHCs under this moratorium. Now, the moratorium is still in effect, but they are letting clinics into the program, and they're setting your rate. Instead of using a budgeted cost report, they're setting your rate according to the average for your grand division, meaning if your clinic's in West Tennessee, then your rate's going to be set at the average RHC rate in West Tennessee. Middle Tennessee, same applies. I didn't put those rates in here, but it's, I think, around $134 to $141 a visit, depending on which division you're in. So they're going to set that right off the bat, and that's what they're going to pay you on. At least that's what they're doing right now. You'll operate under that until you have 12 months of actual data to submit to TennCare. They want to set your final rate using 12 months of real expenses, not 6 or 8 months of estimated expenses. And like I just said, new rural health clinics will be reimbursed for TennCare visits at the RHC average until you get your final rate established. You're going to establish a rate with a final cost report. Again, that's 12 months of actual cost. One of the things that's come into question is the comptroller has recently said they want 12 months of cost that you incurred as an RHC. So if you got certified in March, that means they want your expenses from March of that year to March of next year. In the past, if you were open in January and got certified in March, you could still send in January to December, because the expenses you report in January were real expenses. You weren't a rural health clinic then, but it's still real expenses. So the comptroller has kind of waffled on that, and we've called them, questioned them on it, and we're awaiting a response for a couple weeks now, so we'll see what happens there. But anyway, once we get the final cost report submitted, we just have to wait on the comptroller to set the rate. And unfortunately, that's been, for a lot of folks, a long time, multiple years. They can ask for clarifying information. A lot of times when you send the final cost report in, they're going to want to know, may ask for receipts, they may ask for a general ledger, may ask for a time studied, to see how long if you've got a nurse practitioner that owns a clinic, how long were you there? How much time do you spend seeing patients versus how much time do you spend as the owner of the clinic doing owner duties? Productivity standard for Medicare, FTE is a full-time equivalent. On the cost report, a full-time equivalent is important. That's how salaries and stuff are determined to be reasonable or not. Now, Medicare defines that one FTE for a physician as 4,200 visits a year. So to be considered a full-time physician in the clinic, 4,200 visits a year would be what the physician has to see. For a nurse practitioner, it's 2,100 visits. Now that's for cost reporting purposes only. For Medicaid, or TennCare, they consider one FTE to be 2,080 hours a year, which is 40 hours a week. That's typical for any other business. I mean, a full-time employee, full-time means 40 hours a week, right? But that causes problems. When Medicare uses an FTE defined by visits, and TennCare uses an FTE defined by hours, and they use those to justify a salary you're paying somebody, then you're not comparing apples to apples. Most of you have nurse practitioners who you might have some who see I don't know. Let me make sure I word this right.
You could have one nurse practitioner that sees 6,000.
You could have one NP that works 40 hours a week and sees 6,000 patients a year. You could have another one that works in the clinic that works 40 hours a week and sees 2,000 patients a year, right? So, and as an owner, you probably want to pay the one that's seeing 6,000 better than you pay the one that's seeing 2,000. All right, you want to pay them to be productive. You can't do that when TennCare defines an FTE by the hours.
Which is one of the reasons we fought them on these rules. They can't now come in and use a different standard of reasonability on your cost report than Medicare does. So this is just to bring to your attention the way they're looking at the reports, the way the accountants are looking at the reports versus, how we have reported them on our cost reports.
Where this, to give you an example of how this creates a problem, I think the allowable Medicare salary for a family practice physician is $315,000 a year this year. Now, the state of Tennessee, or Medicare is saying that's $315,000, for one FTE. If you only see 2,200 patients a year, then they're going to cut that $315,000 in half. But with the state of Tennessee, they're going to be going by hours. They're going to know how many hours were you in the clinic. How many hours were you in the clinic seeing patients? If you're the MD owner, they want to know how many hours were you seeing patients, how many hours were you in there paying the bills. And they don't want to pay you the same for paying bills as they do for seeing patients, which isn't, our argument is it's not fair. If you're the owner, you should be compensated for ownership duties and be compensated well. The whole reason I'm mentioning this is especially for those of you who are working on cost reports right now or are about to be sending us cost reports and putting them together, and we'll be working with you on that. Just know we're going to ask about FTEs, and this is what they are. Rusty went over that.
He come back on he said he's using licensed clinical therapists or whatever they're.
Licensed professional counselors.
Yeah, right.
Is Rusty, he say he was using them?
He said he was.
Yeah.
But based on that extra thing that they threw in there on the printed definition versus the regular definition that was on the slide.
Let me explain that. So what it is the state of Tennessee has said, we recognize an LPC visit as an RHC encounter. And they'll pay you with it, which is great. If you could go hire LPC, use them in your clinic, because they're easier to find than an LCSW is to find. Now, if at some point TennCare said, oh, they shouldn't have told you that, or that the feds come in and say an LPC isn't by by definition, an actual RHC encounter, you've paid them all incorrectly, they could come back and say, y'all owe us all that money back. So, but at this point, TennCare is paying for the LPC visits and are recognizing them on your quarterly reports as an encounter. Does that make sense?
I understood that, but what I don't understand is LPCs are far more common than the social workers are. So if you're trying to get a clinic that's gonna have some kind of mental health counselor, then you're kind of, one way you go, if you're careful, then you're only gonna have social workers, and you're not gonna be able to have a fund of people to choose from, whereas in the other way, there's a larger pool of employees, so you end up, it's a crapshoot, I guess.
Well, we just can't officially tell you,
Right.
yes, we can tell you what the definitions are, we can tell you what TennCare is doing, and then ultimately, like Rusty said, for his own clinic, he decided he wanted to take the risk, and that's what he did because he had available LPCs. And we have other clients that have LPCs that haven't even counted them as encounters because they were concerned about, they still are providing the service, but they're not turning them in on their quarterly reports. So if you wanted to do that, you could do that, and then if at some point there's some official, document that says LPC is, it's just not something that somebody made up and put on a slideshow, yeah. I know, well, that's why we're so eager to get rules, we want them to put rules in place, that's good. We just don't want them to have rules that are illegal and are gonna be detrimental to every RHC in this city. Sorry, Lamar.
No, that's fine. We did talk about the definition of a visit, and Rusty recited it from memory. Medically necessary face-to-face visit by qualified provider to an eligible patient. But there are some things that aren't visits, and this is important when it comes to reporting quarterly visits. You need to know what counts as a visit and what doesn't. If they come in and get their blood pressure checked, that's not a visit. And it's going to be based on CPT basically, which we'll teach you for those who are new to it. Cost reports. Medicare requires a cost. Oh, Dr. Armour.
So, I'm a little confused about this. So, an RHC encounter is not a visit for obtaining or renewing a prescription?
I see that as you have to evaluate the person to decide if they're on the right dose or whatever, not just, I try to have my people never write here for a refill.
If you see, it goes on to say that in which the need was previously determined.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, if they come in, the medicine's the same, nothing changes, then you wouldn't fill it as in 90212.
that could probably be reworded. It probably goes more towards a refill.
Well, what we have to say in our chief complaint is like what we do is we say like patient here can follow up on hypertension, on diabetes, whatever we're gonna refill. So if they're there to get like their thyroid medicine, their hypertension medicine, and diabetes, we'll put patient here to follow up on hypertension, diabetes, and thyroid problems instead of saying needs refill of medication. That way it's considered, and then we address everything and can order labs and whatnot at that point.
Well, we've always been, as physicians, we're taught to give a picture of the patient in that, basically, the first few lines, like 40-year-old white female with hypertension, diabetes, who is here for follow-up, the complaints of.
Well, I think for it boils down to what you're doing when they come in. If you take enough time and do that and do an evaluation of the patient, then you're going to code it as such. If they come in, and somebody sits them down in the exam room and you come in and they say, all I need is a refill on my whatever, and you say okay and leave, then that's not going to be an encounter.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
cost reports, like I said, are required by Medicare. This is for everybody, pediatrics and those that are not solely pediatrics. You got to send a cost report in every year by May 31st. The only qualifier would be if your clinic has a different fiscal year, but we don't have any clients that I'm aware of that use some kind of a different fiscal year, like July to July or October to October. If you don't send it in on time, you'll get a letter from Medicare saying they're going to cut your payments off, which to a peds clinic probably ain't going to matter.
Still causes panic.
Yeah. But to everyone else, it'll cause a little panic. But it's typically, it's rectified pretty easily, and if you send it in, they'll turn your payments back on. You've got some options. Once your Medicare rate has been set by a cost report, you can file a low utilization cost report, which is just an amended version. It's basically just sending in a profit and loss and a trial balance, and that's it. Mike, you had your hand raised.
You're just talking about Medicare Part A, right?
Yes. And then a no utilization cost report would be what your peds, mainly peds. We do have a couple clinics that don't see Medicare at all, but peds don't see Medicare. So they can do a no utilization cost report once all your rates have been established. Keep in mind, if you file a low utilization, and this $250,000 in annual Medicare A reimbursements, it was $25,000. So if you if you receive more than $25,000 in Medicare A, you couldn't file a low utilization. But this year it's gone up to $250,000. Now, if you file a low utilization, you're not going to get reimbursed for your flu and pneumonia shots or Medicare bad debt, because the only way you can get reimbursed for those is if you file a full cost report. The comptroller wants a courtesy copy of every cost report submitted to Medicare, which we do. We'll send them a copy. The comptroller has to have a copy of the cost report to set your final rate, obviously. But there's no due date for TennCare. You can send your final cost report in, I guess, whenever you feel like it, as long as it's got 12 months of data on it. It's going to be based on the same time frame, but you don't have to get it to them in any certain amount of time. In the new rules, which just got pulled, the amount of information the comptroller was going to require was nauseating to look at. I mean, it was a detailed general ledger, timesheets for every member of your timesheets for all of your employees. I can't remember. I mean, you're going to end up having to send them a box of paper every year. So even if Medicare didn't require you to, even if for Medicare you could do a low utilization or no utilization, TennCare was going to want you to send in a full cost report every year with all the supporting documentation to back it up, which would be a tremendous burden and terribly expensive. I hope they reconsider that. Keep everything. Keep everything. So what expenses can go on your cost report? If it's an expense incurred by the clinic in order to provide RHC services, you should put it on the cost report. Nothing goes on the cost report that cannot be backed up with a pay stub, receipt, invoice, W-2, 1099, whatever. Expenses that go on the cost report must be reasonable. That's the key word to a lot of the trouble we have now is who defines reasonable. I mean, who defines a reasonable salary for a nurse practitioner?
Who defines a reasonable salary for a physician that owns a clinic? Who defines what's reasonable for you to pay your front desk person? Who defines a reasonable vehicle payment for your clinic? I mean, is a Ferrari reasonable as your company vehicle? Probably not, but you don't necessarily have to go to the junkyard and buy one either.
But if you have a front desk person who just graduated from high school and it's her first job versus if you have a front desk person that's worked for you for 25 years, you may not pay that person the same. And so those are things you have to consider.
If my wife owns a clinic and I'm gonna be a manager of it, and I have a PhD, or let's say I'm a CPA, I should probably get paid, or a reasonable salary for me might be more than if I'm, maybe, I don't know.
A gardener.
A gardener. A gardener, yeah. Reasonable is a gray area, and the problem is when, as things have been deemed reasonable or not reasonable, there has been no consistency when the comptroller has determined this stuff. There hasn't been a standard.
Although there have been standards that we have used for all of your cost reports every year. There are MGMA standards of reasonability for healthcare providers, and
Medicare uses,
has approved
Medicare defaults to the MGMA standards. So you can pull out the MGMA and you can look and see what a pediatrician is worth, and you know if I put more than that on there, I'm not going to get it. It says it right there. With Tennessee, it doesn't say that. So basically, you're trying to hit a moving target, and it can be difficult. But hopefully, again, we're working on it, and we're going to keep working on it until it's fair. When it comes to the finances of your clinic, if you are not a CPA or if you don't have a strong accounting sense, you need to hire someone to keep the books. Now, I know most of the bigger clinics probably use an accounting firm. Some of the smaller ones, maybe not. This can cause big problems because the state of Tennessee, the comptroller has said they're going to audit every cost report they get. All right? Now, that can create a problem if your financial statements are in a mess because you just kept them on a scratch pad. And I've got down there, your general ledger needs to equal your financial statements, which need to match the cost report. I don't know how to put it any simpler than that, but everything has to match. It's very easy for the comptroller to look at the salaries on your cost report and look at the salaries on your profit and loss statement, and then look at the checks you wrote in your general ledger, and if those don't all match, then you got a problem. And once you have one problem, that's always going to turn into, once they start digging, they ain't going to quit digging. Spend the money to make sure you have a CPA or somebody who's really good with QuickBooks to keep your finances straight for you. It's important. So once you've got your costs down, the second requirement, the second component of getting your rate set is your number of visits, your RHC rate. How'd Rusty make that laser come on? Yeah, but I'm scared if I push a button, something will happen. Anyway, the first bullet point there, your RHC rate is determined by dividing the cost by the visits. Now, visits here we're talking visits by all payers, not just TennCare. On the cost report, you put total visits by all payers. You gotta have a good way of tracking your visits. And being accurate not only means counting the right CPT codes, it also means knowing kind of keeping up with a good idea of when you send in a projected cost report, you're going to estimate how many visits you're going to see that year. All right. It makes a difference if you end up seeing a lot more than what you anticipate. In that example, I've just got, let's say you've got a clinic that has $1 million worth of cost, 10,000 visits, that's $100 a visit. $1 million worth of cost, 12,000 visits, $83 a visit. $1 million in cost, 8,000 visits is $125 a visit. This is just to show in this situation, the cost is the same in all three scenarios. The only thing that's changing is the visits, but you've got a variance from $83 to $125. If you put on your projected cost report that you're going to see, you expect to see 10,000 visits, and you end up seeing 12,000 visits, but you spent the same amount of money, you're going to owe $17 back for every visit you saw. So you got to keep up with your visits during your rate setting year, and if you have to, make adjustments so you don't come out upside down.
Are those just RHC visits? What if you see commercial insurance?
On the cost report, it's everything. Medicare, Medicaid, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Cigna, every payer, private pay.
The only thing that it doesn't count is if they come in for injections.
Right. Right.
That doesn't make sense. If we set a rate based on commercial insurance. I know. It's still up your it's like you back in the military.
Well, they're taking your total expenses and dividing it by the total visits to get a dollar amount per visit that it costs you to see any patient. All right, and then they're saying, all right, for the 10 care patients you see, we'll make up the difference. Blue Cross doesn't need to make up the difference because most of the time they're paying triple what 10 care pays anyway. So it's just that's the purpose of the RHC program, is to incentivize clinics to see the 10 care patients, because typically from a financial perspective, 10 care doesn't pay enough, and if you've got a patient with Blue Cross and a patient with 10 care fighting for the same appointment slot, which one are you going to give it to from a financial perspective? You're going to give it to Blue Cross. They can pay you 3 times more. I mean, none of us in here are working for free yet. Maybe one day we'll get it. Might not be working for much, but I mean, I'm not at a point where I can volunteer my time 40 hours a week. I still need to get paid a little bit. Once you get your rate set, then here's where it's important, where the RHC program comes into play. You got to send the quarterly report into the comptroller. Like Rusty said, the comptroller has basically said you cannot report a visit until you've been paid for the visit.
Because they gotta make up the difference.
Right, they need to know how much you were paid for it before they can reimburse the difference. But you report the visit in the quarter it occurred. So you report them by day of service. So if I see a patient, if I saw a patient today, would I get reimbursed for it by the 1st of August?
It's in the same quarter, so you're good.
Yeah, this might not, yeah.
You saw a patient
Let's say
June the 27th and got paid July the 10th.
Right. That would be a visit that you got paid in the 3rd quarter, but you'd have to report it in the 2nd quarter. You report all money associated with the visit, not just what you get for the office visit CPT.
Hey, Lauren, I have a question, because I think, I don't understand, so, your visits at the end of your quarter, you have not heard from, you haven't been paid, you have not heard from. I don't report those visits and the number of visits in that quarter. I do that, my next cost report, and back it up.
You mean your next quarterly report?
Yeah, my next, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get to that in just a second. But when we talk about reporting all the money, this is an example. I don't know how well you can see, but the office visit code here was a 99214. It paid $85.23. So that's one visit. But the total money on the claim ended up being, talk about something that's hard to understand. At the end of the day, the payment for that visit was $94.29. But you can see you've got some codes on there. You've got an injection code, and then you've got the codes for the medicine. I think it's Benadryl and prednisone, something else. I can tell you in a couple of the fraud cases that they've accused, what some folks were doing was, instead of reporting this as one visit, they reported as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. It's 5 CPT codes are on there, 5 visits.
That was not anybody we know, so we don't know.
That's all the same day?
Yes, sir. That claim is that's all the same day.
For one day.
For one day. It doesn't make sense unless you had somebody who didn't know any better and just thought, well, I'm counting up the CPTs, the 5 of them, they paid $94.29.
Let me ask another question.
Okay.
Go back to the injection example. If the only thing this person showed up and got was the injection, it doesn't go on the quarterly, correct?
Right.
Well, the amount of money you received does.
The money would, yes.
Well, he'll get paid anywhere between $15 and $20.
So you'd report the $15 and $20, but you're not going to report a visit.
Not reported on the quarterly.
Not the visit, just the money.
So I'll report the visit, but not. So I'll report the money, not the visit.
Correct.
Yes.
Because you didn't have to see it in provider.
Yeah, the nurse did the show.
Now, look, all TennCare is doing is they're trying to get credit for every dollar they send you because they're fixing to make up the difference. So if they sent you $6 for an injection, you got to count that.
Okay.
But you don't want to count it as a visit and have them send you $100 extra in your wraparound.
Yeah.
If your rate was $106, you wouldn't want that to happen. So.
And we have seen, let me just make a note, we have seen some of the MCOs coming back and recalculating and saying, well, we paid you 13 cents too much, or we didn't pay enough and here's an extra $1. So when you run those reports, you might have minus 13 cents, plus 57 cents, minus $1, whatever. You would add all that up, and whatever the total is at the bottom, that's your money. Does that make sense? So you would count your number of visits that are eligible CPTs that are per the definition. That gives you your visit total for those dates of service. You would add up all the dollars plus or minus and get a total, and that gives you the total, and then they divide the two and pay you the difference.
And so like if you have, we have ultrasound, and so it would be the same thing as the injection. You would count what you got paid for the ultrasound, but that doesn't
Even if
count
it's
as
not
that.
associated with the visit?
If it's associated with the visit, then that visit code would count, and all of the money would count.
But what if they come back Tuesday, because that's only when my ultrasound lady's there?
Well, then you need to see them on Tuesday if you want to get an encounter.
So you would have to.
No.
You would still include your money, but it wouldn't be another encounter. Unless they saw the ultrasound said something, you need to be seen by a provider.
Well, I'm
But
thinking
Teresa,
about a TennCare patient.
But that's a report, right?
Right.
But if somebody shows up for an ultrasound, are they not doing that because they came in for an office visit and you told them they needed an
So
ultrasound?
that was
Yes.
gonna be.
So that's
counted
where you're
as
gonna get the visit.
Associated, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But then I'm still
But you don't
supposed to
get the
count that.
follow-up.
But you
Money.
still have to count what you
If
get
they come
paid
in for an
the
allergy
ultrasound.
shot and you got a payment, that would be money you have to count.
But
But
no
no
visit.
visit.
Oh, can I?
Because you wouldn't have a 992.12345 associated with that dollar.
I just wanna say something that I've been to some of the MCO meetings and they are saying, Blue Cross Blue Shield has it in writing and I wanna think somebody else does. If a child comes in for a sick visit and they need a well visit,
That's too good.
two visits. Now, does anybody have any experience with doing that for adults?
Like
I've been
doing
doing
the
that.
same, like doing
Yeah, same way.
Again, that's
the
two
same
eligible
follow-up
codes.
visit with
Yeah,
the,
we've been
with
doing
the well exam.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I've been doing too, but.
I went to one
No, it's
meeting
one visit.
that they said, and again, I don't think there's a real rule, but that one rule said if it's 18 and under, it's 2 encounters. If it's 19 and above, it can't be counted 2 encounters. So we were counting on 2 encounters for everybody, but we stopped when that person said that. Now, we're losing money if we really could, and I don't know.
Then you
the right
hope to
rule.
make your clinic policy in that situation. If you're over 18, you're gonna have to come back for that PPST, and that could be your policy. We haven't gotten that in writing from any. We've got MCO reps that say all kind of stuff. They say one thing in West
Right.
Tennessee, they say something else in East Tennessee. So we aren't gonna advise you that as far as it goes. We're just gonna
So
advise
if
you
that's
further.
the case though, then it would be better to make the policy at 18 and up, that you, if you're here for a follow-up, you have to schedule a well
And
exam
there's
on a different.
Right, and there's also additional payments that you may be receiving for over and above things you're doing. So they're tracking some of the wellness issues.
BMI.
Okay, so those payments are over and above your RHC rate. So any of those monies that you receive do not go on your quarterly report. But it's over and above.
And they're usually like on ours, Amerigroup is probably one of the biggest ones that we get those from, and they're usually like,
You-
there's an
You
N
report
code.
them and you shouldn't have, we can.
There's an F code on it.
But those, yeah, so in the same way, if you're a PCMH and you're getting additional money for those wellness stuff, that does not count in your quarterly report. Any of those wellness initiatives, because why would you do it? Because you're doing it to get that extra, I mean, you're doing it to take better care of your patients, but I mean, you do it because you get additional reimbursement, and that is in writing from the state that says that is over and above outside of your RHC reimbursement.
Dr. Armour.
We had the Amerigroup rep for our area come recently within the past 2 months. And we asked that specific question about the wellness exam and if they were sick or if they had hypertension per se and needed follow-up regarding that, could we charge for the 2 visits? And she said yes. But with the EMR, you have to open up 2 separate nodes. Do the wellness note and then do a separate acute visit as well.
But that's why we're saying, run your CPT codes, then run your totals paid, and that's what you put on the quarterly report, anything that you have not reported before. Because like I said, sometimes you've already been paid an encounter, but to come back and adjust it up or down a couple bucks, you wouldn't count another encounter, but you do need to count that money.
Those wellness, the wellness screenings are, one of the few instances where you can bill for 2 visits in one day. And for the billers that are here, tomorrow, Gary Archibald will cover that, Gary Lucas cover that, and I promise, any questions about when and how it can be billed, he can cover there.
The whole idea is ordinarily you want to get as much income as you possibly can from each office. In this circumstance, you want to have fewer visits, so if we had this illness visit as well as a child checkup visit, we would report both, I guess, to attend care, but, we end up increasing our number of visits and that.
During your cost set, yeah.
During your cost setting, yes, sir, during your cost setting year, you're right, but
We would still project those.
we would, yeah. The main thing is, just making sure you're accounting for it when you project your cost out. You know, you wouldn't want to,
All of a sudden.
like a big mistake would be to not project that and you're counting those as one visit, and then in your rate setting year, you count them as 2 visits. When your visits just shot up by however many, so that's where you would be in trouble.
They're gonna look at that.
Right.
That's why we would say don't add mental health providers until after that cost setting, or towards the end of that cost setting year, so that you don't all of a sudden add another 2,000 or 3,000 visits that you can't spend enough to offset, because it's gonna adversely affect your rate during that rate setting year.
Shannon shows up at month 9 and says you need to close for the last 3 months.
Don't see
That's
patients.
happened.
I think that
Closing
might
every
happen.
weekend, every holiday, on vacation, go get your CNAs.
I'm hoping this isn't
Sorry.
on the microphone.
You're on the microphone.
Well, look, in all seriousness, when the state was accusing another consultant of fraud, this was an example they were saying was fraud. Was he's saying you have to control your visits? It's not fraud. It's smart business sense, right? I mean, if you're fixing to lose $30 or $40 a visit for the rest of the time you're in business,
But as a taxpayer, or, I can see both sides of it.
Well, as a taxpayer, we want our HCs to be in business, or else we're paying 10 times
They're
what
going to the hospital, ER.
if it makes you feel any better, Miss Teresa, your taxes are gonna go up that you have to pay back if you reap the benefits.
Hey, I don't complain about paying my taxes.
Anyway, back to this. The main thing I wanted to show here is that this is one visit. There's 5 CPT codes on there, but it's one visit, and it paid $94. Now you should know between each of your payers, AmeriGroup, Blue Care, and United, you should know generally what they pay for a 99212, 99213, 214. So that as you're looking down through there, if you see something off, it'll catch your eye. If I see a 99213 and $2.67 beside it, I'm gonna know something not right. It's probably they're making up $2 from something. Maybe they underpaid or something, but I'm not gonna count that as a visit. I know no real visit is gonna pay me $2.67. Because if I turn that in, then the state's gonna reimburse me the difference. And what's that? We'll get to how we kind of, another way to keep an eye on that. This is the report that those of you who are well established are very familiar with. Those of you who are new, this is what you're going to fill out every quarter. Where's Shannon? Shannon, will you come up here on stage? It ain't karaoke time yet. I basically just wanted to show you've got 4 quarters on here, and there's 4 lines of data for each quarter. So can you?
So let me see if I can figure out how that one goes.
All right, let's see. Pointer.
This is where people get really confused.
All right. So if this is your first time seeing it, just bear with me. So this person, this is their 3rd report to the state. The state always wants to look at 4 quarters worth of data. If you were to get paid for a visit in 4th quarter from the previous 4th quarter, we can still put it on this report. We just have to add another column. So if that happens, you just let us know and we add another column to this report. But this is report number 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the 6th report. They're only ever going to pay on the gray line. So you have a gray line for visits and a gray line for dollars. So report number 6, we didn't have any additional visits from the 1st quarter to report or the 2nd quarter. We got paid for another 91 visits for the 3rd quarter, and we got 1,021 visits for the 4th quarter. We would have requested this about the 7th or 10th of January. So, and you can turn it to us. They want it within 30 days at the end of the quarter. So we have 0, 0, so we didn't have any money associated because we didn't get any additional visits paid. Now, it could happen that you had money difference, but you want to make sure to look at that when you run those reports. So it's plausible they could have taken some money back or something like that and didn't pay you any visits, as an example. But see, we're still running these averages. So you have 903 total visits you've been paid for first quarter that were associated with $41,000 in reimbursements from Tinker MCOs. Okay, he's got the averages on the next slide, so you'll see. But anyway, so you got total number of visits. These are the visits that we reported in the other quarters. They're only gonna pay on the gray line. And when you get those notice of reimbursement letters, you'll get a notice of reimbursement set of letters for each quarter that you turned in to total it out.
That is what I wanted. The main thing I wanted to show, and this is what, Mike, we were talking about, like these 91 visits right here would have been most likely the visits that occurred right at the end of the third quarter, so just hadn't gotten paid for them yet. By the time we turn in the fourth quarter report, we've gotten paid for those 91 visits. We report them there. That's how much money we got paid for them. This takes a little getting used to, but and we'll work with you on it however many times we need to until we get it right. I'm gonna come back to this in just a second. When we get the visits, the way we check them is we look at the averages. Remember, I said you should know your average, what you get from the MCOs. So on that Q1, the average was $45.41 a visit. That was that 41,000 divided by 903. We're going to look at the average for each quarter. What we're looking for is some decent consistency in the averages. There's no reason why you should have one quarter visits averaging $85 and then the next quarter they average $52. You know, that's $30 average per visit is a big swing. And so we're going to say, wait a minute now, something's off. Generally, if it's too high, it typically means you've got some visits you didn't report. You know, you're missing some visits. You reported a lot of money, but not enough visits, and so your average has jumped way up, and so you know something's wrong. The averages vary a lot by provider, and it varies mainly depending on how you practice medicine. Some people will do a lot of labs and tests and all that, and so their per visit average may be up around $85, $90. You've got others, like this one here, he's not doing much else besides he's making he's doing the office visit and not a lot else with it, you know, so a $40 average per visit is pretty low.
But that was common when all of a sudden the MCOs decided to change all the patients around, and then all of a sudden you had a bunch of Blue Care patients, but now you don't. Now you only have a bunch of Amerigroup patients, and you know we've seen all that. You know we've seen that. Oh, by the way, Amerigroup sent a letter out to all of your patients telling them that you're not a provider anymore. We've just seen all kinds of things that happen.
And there's also some pretty significant difference between the three on what they would pay for a 99213. You know, one of them may pay $42, one of them may pay $60. Well, if you got a bunch of the $60 ones, you're going to look better than the guy who's got all of these. So what we're looking for is consistency from quarter to quarter. It doesn't have to. Go ahead.
Can be consistent year to year, because in peds, we see a lot of sick visits in the winter months, we see a lot of well child visits in the summer months.
Right.
They pay significantly more for well child than they do for the sick visits, so we're gonna have.
But total visits will go down during that time.
The total visits will go
So
down.
your
because
average
you're
would go up.
not gonna see as many visits.
Anytime we have a question about the averages, we'll ask. And when we ask, don't take it as a accusation of wrongdoing. The answer may be, hey, this time of year, it's all sick visits and we're having to do a flu test on everybody and a strep test on everybody, and okay, I'm good with that.
We need to have an explanation of it.
If it's
Yes, sir.
some drastic change.
Yes, sir. This is what the sheet looks like where they calculate your rate. If y'all remember this morning, Rusty talked about capital that gets added back in by TennCare. He's like, I don't know what it is. I don't know where it comes from. It's coming from something on the cost report. There it is right there. $6.65 per visit in capital that TennCare adds to the core service rate. This is your Medicare rate right here. 102.48.
You mean like what we actually spent per patient? Is that what you're saying? I missed that. I'm sorry.
Well, this is what the comptroller has calculated as your core service rate right here,
Okay.
based on from your cost report
On your rate setting year.
in your rate setting year.
Yeah.
This is the capital that they calculated.
We take something to own a building and take something to rent space and stuff like that.
Capital expenses are made up of stuff like rent, equipment can go into it, but the formula they use is where it's hard to predict what it's going to be.
Do they get that capital number from the annual report that we give you?
They get it from your final cost report. Yes, sir.
From the final cost report? Okay.
There's a page behind this where it shows the numbers, some of the numbers they use for capital, but if you try to take that page and go look at your cost report and find everything, you're not going to be able to do it. But anyway, what this shows is there was 893 TennCare visits. The MCOs paid $35,669 for those 893 visits. So TennCare for this quarter is going to owe you $61,784. They're making up the difference between if you take the 893 and multiply it by your final rate. In this case, it's 102.48. It's $109.13 a visit. That's what this person's rate was. So this is what they should have got paid. This is what the MCOs paid. This is what TennCare is going to make up the difference. They're going to send that quarterly check. Once your final rate is set, these numbers right here don't change except for the Medicare economic increase. All right? That's it. Shannon just pointed at her watch. That's my dog, Smokey. That's it, unless we have questions.
Let's go back to the over 19 well visits. Count them or not count them? Don't we? If you get paid, count them.
You're gonna be reimbursed. I mean, if you bill it, you're gonna get paid by your MCO.